The hearing will come to order. And without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. Let me say good morning and welcome to today's hearing, the oversight of the Department of Energy's Research and Development Enterprise. And do I have an opening statement? Good morning. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. We are delighted that you're here today. As you know, this committee has jurisdiction over the Department of Energy's vitally important science and energy research and development activities, the laboratories and facilities. So I hope we see you much more frequently from now on, and I look forward to working with you throughout this Congress. With the budget season mostly behind us, I'd like to bring just a few minutes and a few items to your attention. I'll start with the good news, which is that despite the administration's best effort to make draconian cuts across the board to DOE research and development programs, most actually fared well in the House of Representatives. I'm particularly pleased to see the increases to the budget for ARPA-E and the Loan Programs Office, both of which have yielded truly transformative results for energy technologies of all types. I'm also quite happy that the House supported a substantial increase in the ITER International Fusion Project, which I strongly advocated for as well. I went to visit that project a couple of years ago, and practically everybody over there was a Texan. It's crucial that we honor our commitment to this project and ensure that we are providing the support for the Department of Energy itself identified would be necessary to maintain its construction schedule and minimize its total cost to U.S. taxpayers. The completion and operation of this project will have substantial contributions to what we know as fusion energy today. If successful, this project could be a huge game changer in the energy future of not only our nation, but for humanity as a whole. Now for the bad news. Yet again, it is extremely disheartening, that quite frankly disturbing, to see the dramatic cuts laid out in the administration's budget proposal. I know that you must think I sound like a broken record, Mr. Secretary, because we had this same conversation last year. But unfortunately, it is necessary until the administration stops producing these short-sighted proposals and deploys a thorough, thoughtful process for developing its budget request. I'm thankful for your enthusiastic report of all these programs, Mr. Secretary, but enthusiasm alone is really not enough for the American people. We need to see constructive, forward-looking budget proposals being submitted to Congress. Moving beyond the budget, we are here today to allow our members to ask questions pertaining to all research and development programs within the entire department. As the title of this hearing suggests, constituents from member districts on both sides of the aisle benefit greatly from these programs, and we believe it is our duty to ensure the responsible use of their tax dollars. Many of these programs haven't been authorized in many years, or ever in some cases. We hope to create more thoughtful, bipartisan legislation this Congress to support the important science and energy research stewarded by the department, and we want to work with you in that effort. With that, I'd like to thank you again for being here, Mr. Secretary, and I look forward to a productive discussion this morning. Our ranking member is not present, but we have a well-known Texan who is sitting in for him today, and so now I recognize Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Chairwoman Johnson, for hosting this hearing, and welcome to our fellow Texas statesman, Governor Secretary Rick Perry. We appreciate him being here. As we've heard from the Chairwoman, the Department of Energy and Secretary Perry have proposed a budget that requests cuts to programs that have traditionally received bipartisan support from this committee. I'd like to remind my colleagues on both sides of the aisle two important facts. Number one, the budget proposal is just that, a proposal. We, the members of Congress, are the ones tasked with actually setting the funding levels after hearing from important witnesses like Secretary Perry today. Second, I want to stress that we will have tough decisions to make on the DOE budget. We do not have unlimited funds, and we cannot fund every project, no matter how worthy. Critical programs must be prioritized, and we have to make smart, targeted investments that give the American taxpayer the best bang for their buck year after year. And at the Department of Energy, there is an incredible range of programs for us to review. This committee's jurisdiction includes all of DOE's civilian research, including over $10 billion in research, development, demonstration, and commercial application programs, as well as the Department's 17 national labs. This amount incredibly totals 1/3 of the Department of Energy's budget, 1/3 of the budget. Mr. Secretary, I don't have to tell you that you lead an incredible department, quite well, I might add, with a long history of major research achievements. Over the past 70 years, research conducted at DOE's national labs has led to monumental achievements in medicine, manufacturing, computing, as well as the development of innovative energy technology. Each national lab has made invaluable contributions to the United States scientific progress, and they have repeatedly demonstrated that basic science research is the most effective way to encourage innovation. Additionally, DOE's 26 user facilities provide our nation's researchers with the most cutting-edge tools of modern science, like advanced light sources, particle accelerators, and the 2 fastest supercomputers in the world. Each year, approximately 22,000 researchers from academia and the private sector use DOE facilities to perform new scientific research and to develop new technologies. Here at home, DOE heads most federally sponsored research in the physical sciences. Internationally, the United States, through the department's work, is the world leader in basic science research and technological development. But other countries, like China, are making significant investments in basic research, threatening America's global standing as the leader in scientific knowledge. Without the department's continued investment in basic and early stage research, the U.S. is in danger of losing its global technology edge. By investing wisely in this research, the department can achieve its goal of scientific discovery and technological breakthroughs for future generations. DOE must also invest in the research infrastructure that brings the best scientists in the world to the United States. I look forward to hearing from Secretary Perry about DOE's implementation of several key pieces of bipartisan Science Committee legislation that was signed into law last Congress, including DOE Research and Innovation Act, the National Quantum Initiative Act, and my bill, the Nuclear Energy Innovation Capabilities Act. The Department of Energy must prioritize the kind of groundbreaking basic research authorized in these bills over grants for technology that is ready for commercial deployment. When the government tries to push developed technology into the market, it wastes limited resources in competition with private investors. But when basic research is the priority and target of federal support, everyone has the opportunity to access the fundamental knowledge that can lead to the development of future technologies. I want to say thanks again to Secretary Perry for taking the time to be here today, and I yield the balance of my time, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
We're told that we don't have to. It can be automatically submitted.
Okay. Thank you very much. If there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I'd like to introduce our witness. The Honorable Rick Perry currently serves as the United States 14th Secretary of Energy. He oversees the Department of Energy, which is tasked with advancing national economic and energy security of the United States, promoting scientific and technological innovation in support of that mission, and ensuring the environmental cleanup in the National Nuclear Weapons Complex. Prior to his current cabinet post, Mr. Perry was elected Lieutenant Governor of Texas in 1998 and later served as Governor of Texas from 2000 to 2015. He was the longest-serving governor in Texas history. Not to tell my age, but I've known this gentleman since he was a young man serving in Texas. So now I'm going to yield to, oh, you have another statement? Okay.
No.
Okay. I'm going to ask our secretary to make his opening statements, and then we'll proceed with questions. Mr. Perry.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you for your kind remarks. Our years in grade school together were great. We're just out of college, for the record. So thank you. Ranking Member Weber, it's my great pleasure to be in front of you and your current role, and thank you for your friendship and your wise counsel through the years, as I can say to a number of the members that are up there. Governor Christ, it's always a pleasure to be in front of a colleague, and as we were making remarks behind the door there, that life after governor is good, and so thank you for your friendship and assistance through the years. It's a pleasure to be in front of each of you members today and to share with you my observations about the President's 2020 budget and his budget request, as Ranking Member Weber so succinctly described it appropriately for the Department of Energy. If I may, to further highlight some of the great work that we're doing, there's just a very short video here that I'd like to ask you to enjoy with me. And it actually has volume 2. It's kind of a new thing we're working on over at the agency to get some volume with our video. Basically, what I'm saying here is that we do some pretty pioneered nuclear safety modeling, assisted the shale gas revolution, the LED revolution, and for those of you that aren't awake, Secretary of Energy remains the coolest job I've ever had. And that's due to the incredibly brilliant and dedicated people at our national labs. They've had an astonishing impact across the nation and literally around the world. Over the years, our scientists and engineers, they've decoded DNA. They've helped kickstart the development of the internet, brought safe drinking water to multitudes, pioneered nuclear safety modeling, assisted the shale gas revolution, the LED revolution, and powered spacecraft to other planets. And we've done all of that and much more, and we're just getting started. Now, I'm especially excited about the potential of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Our national labs are already home to the fastest supercomputers in the world, and we can use them. And our next generation exascale and quantum machines to accelerate America's AI capabilities. DOE-driven AI is already being used to optimize grid security, increase our energy efficiency among a host of other energy-related applications. It's also being used to reduce traffic jams, to strengthen cybersecurity, predict extreme weather, improve emergency response, and even develop better treatments for cancer and traumatic brain injury. Yet I am absolutely convinced we're just scratching the surface of our capabilities. And I'm convinced more than ever that through our advances in science, innovation, and technology, we can make a world-changing impact at DOE. Well, thank you for the privilege to be able to show that to you. As you can see, it is really exciting time to be at the helm of DOE. And I appeared before this committee last year, and I committed to fulfill a number of goals, including protecting our critical energy infrastructure from cyber threats, investing in early stage, cutting-edge research and development, and advancing our leadership in exascale and quantum computing. And I'm proud to report to you that DOE has made progress in every one of those areas. This past fall, I fulfilled a commitment to visit all 17 of our national labs, and I got to witness firsthand, as you saw in that video, the brilliant work that those incredible facilities are engaged in. You'll have the opportunity to see examples at National Lab Day, July the 24th. It's going to be right up here in your backyard on the hill, and I hope you'll consider coming by. Our national labs are homes to, as Randy shared with you, the 2 fastest supercomputers in the world, 5 of the 10 fastest supercomputers in the world, and we got next generation, if you will, exascale computers that are coming online in the very near future to accelerate America's capacity and capabilities in the artificial intelligence world. This is really important. It's important in a host of different reasons, which we'll expound on here during the course of this committee meeting. But I am completely and absolutely convinced the impact that this is going to have on the world that we live in, not just in the area of energy as we commonly think about it, but just in this broad array of science oriented, science-centric areas. Unfortunately, the success of our national labs has also made them a target for people and nations seeking to steal America's ingenuity. And in response, we're requiring DOE employees to fully disclose their involvement in foreign government talent recruitment programs that are sponsored by countries of risk. And you all know who those are: Iran and China and Russia, North Korea. And we've banned our researchers from joining Chinese talent recruitment programs. I happen to think these are common sense approaches, Alex. These are things that we should be doing. And they will better protect our national security and advance research and technology. So in the coming weeks and months, I look forward to working with all of you at the department as we work on these programs that we talked about, our shared programs, Dr. Babin, and I thank you, Madam Chair, for your kindness, your hospitality, and for your longtime friendship. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this point, we'll begin our first round of questions, and the chair recognizes herself for the first round. Mr. Secretary, do you stand by the proposal of the elimination of ARPA-E, or I've heard you make some very positive statements. We are concerned about the future of ARPA-E. It's been such a positive program, and our Appropriations Committee just recommended a fair amount of funding.
Yes, ma'am.
Give us a little bit of how you stand on ARPA-E.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, I'm going to give you a backwards look, and then I'm going to give you a forwards look, if I may. My backwards look is to my previous position of being the governor of the state of Texas and the work that we did there while Randy was a member of the Texas legislature. We worked together on some really exciting, successful public-private partnerships, Texas Enterprise Fund, Texas Technology Fund, and those basically were mini ARPA-Es, if you will. It was a little different in some senses, but when you think about the cutting-edge technology that come out of our national labs, for instance, the dollars that we expend in that arena, our desire to bring technology and then commercialize it. That's what ARPA-E, from my perspective, historically has been about. I respect OMB's work and what they do, but I'll be real honest with you. I respect this Congress more, and I understand how the process works. And I think Ranking Member Weber was spot on when he reminded us that this is a starting point, and it's a starting point, and we recognize that. So going forward, just like I said in other committee hearings previously, I respect this process and I understand how this process works fairly well. And we're going to expend the dollars, and hopefully very wisely and thoughtfully and efficiently, that Congress appropriates. So as you all have historically said, we like ARPA-E. We want it to be run efficiently, effectively, be wise about it, but we hear the message here. Previous Congress sent a clear message about what they think ARPA-E needs to be. I hope you see a reflection of your desire for this program to go forward and to expend these dollars thoughtfully, with the result of programs that are making for a better future for this country.
Well, thank you. Have you had a dialogue with some stakeholders as to whether or not they would continue to invest in these programs without support, or has there been the opportunity for that dialogue?
Yes, Madam Chair, there has been that dialogue with stakeholders, and as a matter of fact, the timeliness of your question is succinct here. Today, DOE is going to be announcing our 2019 Technology Commercialization Fund project selections. There are 77 different projects, and they're going to be matched with funds from the private sector. As a matter of fact, I think there's about 7 of you on this committee. Congressman Baird, your district is one of those that's going to be receiving some of that, and I think Congressman Lamb and Perlmutter, Wexton, Tonto, McAdams, and Governor Christ, your district as well, are all going to have funding for projects. And so to lengthen the answer just a little bit more, Madam Chair, those conversations they're almost continual because of the work that's going on at our national labs, the focus of the department when it comes to I'm a big believer, both in a personal and a professional way, that public-private partnerships are very, very good for commercializing technology that is developed in our national labs.
Well, thank you very much. My time's expired. I'll now recognize Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm glad to hear, Mr. Secretary, that y'all are going to have National Lab Day on July 24th in honor of Charlie Crist's birthday. So happy birthday in advance, Governor.
It's exactly the reason I picked that date, Governor.
So I just didn't realize he had that kind of pull, you know. Secretary Perry, as you know, the President signed my bill, the Nuclear Energy Innovation Capabilities Act, into law last fall. And while I've been pleased to see the department take some important steps in implementing this legislation, such as announcing the mission need for the versatile fast test reactor, which is authorized in the bill, we really heard kind of little from the department about the rest of the bill. So talking about the budget specifically, I was kind of disappointed to see that fiscal year 2020 budget request did not include funding for the National Reactor Innovation Center, which was included in the budget request. And just by way of notes, this innovation center is critical to the development of advanced reactors and will allow those private companies you were talking about to prove their reactor designs without having to endure the lengthy NRC licensing process. And it's also my understanding that the Department of Defense, DOD, is interested in this funding and a reactor prototype at one of the national labs through this program. So I guess my question to you is, How did we not get that in the budget? What's your thoughts on that process?
One of the things that I'm going to do, if I may, Madam Chair, is I'm going to ask for Undersecretary DeBar to share just a little bit of his observation here, because I think this is really important. He's head of our science shop. All of our national labs are underneath him and what have you. But Randy, Congressman Weber, before we do that, I just want to say that we think some of the most exciting research that's being done at the department is dealing with small modular reactors, the advanced reactors that are out there. We've got 2 private sector companies that we're working incredibly close with. We got a piece of land on Idaho National Lab property of where we're going to be, building this out and seeing some real progress made on this. And we think that not only from a commercialization aspect of being able to deliver emission-free power, it's also going to be very, very important tool to non-proliferation with these small modular reactors. So if I may, could I get Paul DeBar?
Sure, yeah, if you'd
to
be
share?
very quick, because I do have a question.
Yes,
too.
sir. All right.
So the versatile test reactor, which is part of the legislation that we'd like to thank this committee for passing, we're moving down that process to identify where to actually place it, at which of the national labs. As you can probably guess, we have more than one interest from a national lab director about where to place it. But we're in the middle of that process, and obviously we're looking forward to placing it in one of the labs that has a long history, which we have several of nuclear power.
Yep. Good. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll take that to mean that you really don't know what the cost is going to be, so how much to put in the budget, but we do need to focus on that. Let me go to question 2. FY 2020 budget request includes a $161 million cut to the Fusion Energy Sciences program, and as a result proposes $108 million in U.S. contributions to the ITER project, which is the world-leading international research collaboration in fusion energy that has in the past received strong and continued bipartisan support from this very committee. This funding level is just over 1/3 of what is required in fiscal year 2020 to maintain the U.S. commitment to participate in ITER. So my question, is the department recommending that we withdraw from ITER? Because it's hard to square this fusion budget, which would make the U.S. responsible for delaying the project and increasing the overall cost with maintaining our international commitment. Are we thinking of withdrawing from the ITER project? I mean, how can we expect other countries to make investments in the U.S.-hosted international projects, like, for example, the Long Baseline Neutrino Facility, if we don't keep our commitments overseas?
Yes, sir. Congressman, you know the history of this, and it really got sideways back when I showed up here in the spring of 2017. ITER was in pretty dire straits, frankly. It had poor management. There was not the type of results that I think any of us were comfortable with. Subsequently, they have a new executive director in there that's doing some really good work. We have regained our confidence. I went and was on the ground there to see, to talk, to interact with the folks there in the south of France, where this facility is. We have become convinced that they are making the right kind of progress. We're doing more in-kind contribution on the solenoid that's coming out of General Atomics in California rather than direct appropriations. But with that said, the $107 million request for 2020 is sufficient to maintain the progress on some of the highest priority U.S. hardware contributions that we're making. So to answer your question specifically, we are recommending that we continue to be engaged with this, cautiously optimistic that when we roll back in here for the next budget cycle that we'll be able to even have better evidence of progress that they're making.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Secretary. It's no surprise to me that you focused on it. We're already on top of it, so I appreciate it. But I just, again, I think it's important, and so I think we want to continue that commitment as much as we possibly can. I'm over my time, Madam Chair. Thank you. I yield back. Thank you, Ms. Secretary.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lofgren.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. Following up on Congressman Weber's focus on fusion energy, I wanted to mention the National Ignition Facility at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab, which is the world's largest laser run by the National Nuclear Security Administration. It's the premier facility within the United States for high energy density and inertial confinement fusion research. I was concerned that the budget from the administration was low. However, the House Administration Committee has provided level funding. I just would throw this caution out. When we lowball the in the budget, it does have an impact on morale among the scientists, even though, and this is not the first time this has happened, it happened under the prior administration as well, where the request is low, Congress gets level funding, but it has an impact that's not positive on the morale of the workforce. So just for the future. I'd like to ask about the Energy Research and Innovation Act, which the President signed last fall. There's a provision in there which directs you to establish and support an R&D program in inertial fusion for energy applications. There was a clear recommendation in the National Academy's report which highlighted several promising research areas to explore with the enormous clean energy potential of inertial fusion energy concepts. These are areas that the weapons stockpile stewardship program would never pursue because it's really not their bailiwick, but the research needs are quite different. What is the status of the department's implementation of this now statutory direction to establish and support an inertial fusion energy research and development program?
Madam Chair, if I could, I'd like to have, again, Paul DeBar kind of share with you a little more detail on that specific side.
Thank you.
Paul?
Thank you.
So, Congresswoman, we're very much focused on seeing commercial fusion move forward. We've been very enthusiastic about the private sector also working with us, increasingly so, including Congressman Bera's, where he went to university at Irvine, which is Tri-Alpha Energy. In inertial confinement, there's a company that came out of technology from Livermore and from Los Alamos called General Fusion, which is actually approaching this from an inertial confinement point of view. We've accelerated our work with the private sector, including with inertial confinement, that inertial confinement company, and we look forward to advancing that technology as well as others. Yeah.
So that's the department's R&D program is basically just private sector?
No, Congressman. Most of it's the science area, but what we've seen is that there has been a growth in the private sector also.
Which is good.
Yeah, and they've brought, there's over $1 billion of private sector money which has been raised, and one of them is in inertial confinement, and we are engaged with them in a number of programs to engage with them amongst others.
I wonder if I could ask this. Could you follow up on this hearing with a more detailed in writing report on kind of the status of implementing this statute, where we are, next steps, and the like? This is enormously important to the committee on both sides of the aisle and really to our country and the world. I would very much appreciate that if you could do that.
Ms. Lofgren, let me just add to that I don't think I'm out of line here inviting you to go take a look at one or both of the private sector efforts that are going on. TAE, which is down in the, I guess, is that the Inland Empire? Is that right, Dr. Bera? Is that in Orange County? Yeah, it's in Irvine. And
it's not inertial, though.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, but
yeah. So there's just some fascinating work. I visited there down at General Atomics and what they're doing and that side of it. And then at Idaho National Lab, some of the work that's going on there, and I think you're next door to Lawrence Livermore.
Correct.
And with the with that light source there, there's some. It's down the road. We understand that, but investments that we're making today, we may look back on 20 years from now and say, well done.
I'll just note, thank you for your enthusiasm for the national labs. It's really important. Yeah. And I think, if we put the kind of focus on this area of research that we should, we'll get there a lot sooner. We've never adequately funded the science on it. And I thank you, Mr. Secretary, and my time has expired.
Thank you very much, Mr. Posey.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing, and thank you for appearing, Mr. Secretary, over here. About half the people in this room are old enough to remember the fuel crisis, the energy crisis, 1973, where everybody in the world everybody in this country that wanted to get gas had to go get in line on odd-numbered tag days in Florida and wait for hours to get a half a tank of gas. Just brought everything to a screeching stop. And in response to which, Congress passed and President Carter signed the act in 1977, which created the Department of Energy to make sure we would never, ever again be victims of such an energy crisis. And I commend you for reaching the current point that we're at now, an unprecedented level of energy independence. So thank you for a job well done, you and the administration. I was very happy to see your references to space in your video presentation. Ultimately, the exploration of space is about the survival of the human species and exploring the unknown to expand our knowledge. Last year, the House Science, Space and Technology Committee worked together to pass H.R. 589, a bipartisan Department of Energy reauthorization bill, which is now law. And as you know, part of the legislation directs the department to carry out a program on low-dose radiation research within the Office of Science, which is going to be necessary to better understand for the future of human spaceflight. And so I just wondered if you could give us a little bit of an update on the status of the plan to implement the program, and if not, you can mail it to me.
Thank you, Congressman Posey. That focus on the partnering between DOE and other agencies of government, in this case NASA, is it's one of the more fascinating things that we do, particularly developing the ways to propel us to deep space. There's going to be work that's done, and small modular reactors may be part of the tie-in here to the propulsion on some of these. But the other side of it is there's a program that's I think it's called Krusty, and I got to see the work that they're doing on it at the Nevada test site a few months back. And Krusty is a acronym for kilowatt reactor using Stirling technology. And Los Alamos is actually where the work's being done. They were showing it to us out at the test site in Nevada, and it's they're partnering. It's just like you see public-private partnerships, and you see NASA, DOE, DOD, particularly through DARPA, working together on some of these projects. The national labs partner up often. So Los Alamos and the Y-12 National Security Complex, and then the national security, I always call it the Nevada test site. That's not the proper name, but the Nevada National Security Site are where they're building and testing these full-scale flight prototypes for nuclear reactor. And by the, we're going to get back into space. We're going to go very far into space, and it's going to be driven by funding that you all are making available through these national labs. So thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bearer.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Secretary Perry, thank you for being here. I just wanted to follow up on a conversation we had a year ago when you were here, and regarding the budget hearing and the 123 nuclear agreement with Saudi Arabia. At that time, there were negotiations taking place, and I think in your comments, there was some hesitation of moving forward without that 123 agreement. And just for the record, the Atomic Energy Act of 1954 requires a peaceful nuclear cooperation agreement, which is the 123 agreement for export of nuclear commodities. I know this past March, earlier this year, you approved the Part 810 authorizations for transfer of certain nuclear energy technologies to Saudi Arabia. And while that Part 810 authorization doesn't require the 123 agreement be in place, part of the approval process requires us to consider whether the transfer of these technologies are in the best interest of the United States, which is what the 123 agreement typically symbolizes. And let me put it in context. My other committee is the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and obviously we are very concerned about the tensions in the region. We know recently, we've obviously pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal. In recent days, the Iranian regime has talked about, increasing their nuclear production and, potentially restarting their nuclear program. Last year, the Saudi Crown Prince on 60 Minutes suggested that if Iran were to pursue nuclear weapons, they certainly would be within their right to pursue nuclear weapons as well. And I think all of the members of this committee, and certainly when we're thinking about the United States' interest, would be very concerned about seeing a nuclear arms race take off in the Middle East, in one of the most unstable parts of the world. So, both in my role as chairman of the Subcommittee on Oversight for Foreign Affairs, as well as my role as vice chair on this committee, could you give us an update on where we are with Saudi nuclear sales?
Dr. Barrow, thank you. I think you very succinctly, for all of us, described why it's so important for the United States to continue to be engaged in that process. If you really care about nonproliferation, if you care about peace in the Middle East, if you will, and it's either in its broadest context, the United States being involved, being engaged, continuing to have a discussion and a negotiation going on, not just with Saudi Arabia, but with all the folks that we can bring to the table on this, wherever they may be. I think it's important from a just an edification process. There's been some misinformation out there from my perspective on the Part 810 and what does that mean? And this isn't some blessing that we're basically saying here's the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, and take this information, do as you will with it, and what have you. An 810, the signing off on a Part 810 simply says it's okay to go have a conversation. It's okay to to start this conversation with a U.S. Technology company dealing with civil nuclear, and you don't necessarily have to have a 123 agreement in place to do that. Thailand's a great example of a country that we have signed Part 810s with, and then there was some other misinformation out there about that this information somehow or another is secret, and it's not. We have, now some of it is proprietary, and previous administrations have made that proprietary information, off the book, so to speak, appropriately. But we've tried to be, we've got a reading room where the folks can come and take a look at it, and we're working with members of Congress that are really interested in this, want to see what's going on as well.
Great, thank you.
Yes, sir.
And I would just emphasize, again, given the tensions in the region, this is a complicated issue. I would still push for that 123 agreement.
Absolutely.
And I understand, there's the competing interests of the Russians and the Chinese, and the Saudis could pivot and go in that direction. But if they're really serious about this, if they want to be a serious player in the world, we've got the best technology, the safest technology, and the best companies. They shouldn't go in that direction. So.
And I made the statement to the leadership of the kingdom that if you want to send a message to the world that you're really serious and want to be adult members of the world community, you need to sign a very strong 123 agreement with the United States.
Great, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Biggs.
Thank you, Chairwoman Johnson and Ranking Member Lucas. Appreciate conducting the hearing today, even though it's Randy Weber sitting in. So that's good. And Miss,
Will the gentleman yield?
no, I will not yield to you, sir. I thank you, Secretary Perry, for joining us today, and I congratulate you, Secretary Perry, on the excellent job that you are doing at the Department of Energy. And I think it's amazing to see what a deregulatory agenda coupled with pro-growth policies can do to benefit our economy and national security at the same time. I'm also encouraged by the administration's commitment to a long-term strategy for viable and competitive nuclear energy and to developing the necessary infrastructure to meet our nation's energy needs. Nuclear energy is particularly important to my home state of Arizona, where nearly 30% of the state's electricity comes from nuclear energy. The Arizona Public Service, the largest electric company in the state, serves 2.7 million people and operates the Palo Verde Generating Station, which produces more than 70% of the state's clean energy. The Palo Verde Nuclear Power Plant is America's largest source of clean air energy, providing over 2,500 jobs and generates an economic impact of more than $2 billion, all while emitting no greenhouse gases. Secretary Perry, you visited Arizona in February, where you stated that President Trump is focused on having a diverse energy portfolio that includes nuclear energy, and we're glad that you came out. I'm personally glad that you came to Arizona to see what we're doing there. You also stated that America needs to continue to be engaged in the development of the next generation of nuclear power. And so, Mr. Secretary, I'm wondering if you would please elaborate on the Department's efforts related to the development of the next generation of nuclear power.
Biggs, thank you. The Advanced Reactor Technologies Program is what you're making reference to, and we're doing the R&D on that as we speak to address the long-term technical barriers that we have, and SMRs is part of this, and I think from my perspective, increased funding for micro reactors. And micro reactors, this is particularly of interest to the DoD as we live in this world. And I know we're going to talk about resiliency at some point in time today of the grid and what's going on. But Mr. Waltz, from a military standpoint, having these micro reactors, even smaller than our SMRs, to develop the power in some of our military operations is going to be tantamount to our ability to perform the national security mission that we have. We're continuing, and I'll talk with some specificity here, the DOE is continuing to support the development of NuScale power. That's their efforts to complete the licensing process and begin to commercialize the design and build associated with the supply chain that they're going to need, the commercial deployment of those reactors, and that's happening at the Idaho National Lab up outside Idaho Falls, and 2026 is the projected time frame on that. So we know, look, the key for us is we're going to have lower capital costs to build these nuclear plants. I mean, we all recognize that with the challenges that the civil nuclear program has got, reducing the schedule, times, and the costs that go into to building those. We need to be focused on the supply chain, keeping it in the United States, and the components that are fabricated by U.S. companies for this, and again, getting back to when we're able to do that, Madam Chair, we're going to be able to send the message that, number one, our energy supply is going to be harder to disrupt. So whether it's a cyber attack, whether it's a natural disaster, all of that is going to be directly affected by these advanced reactors and the development of those.
And so, Mr. Secretary, with regard to that, we've talked about private enterprise and their role in this. How do you incentivize the private sector to participate in this and accelerate the science with this?
Yeah, well, I think one of the fastest way you incentivize the private sector is for government to get out of the way, from a regulatory standpoint, from a cost standpoint. So both, and I don't want to. I don't want anybody to walk away thinking that I have left somehow my understanding of how states function. States have to be very engaged in this process as well, and state governments not be an impediment to the development of these technologies as well. for that matter, states not be impediments to the development of an all-of-the-above energy portfolio for this country. So I would suggest to you one of the best ways that we can send the message that we want you to invest in this is to make sure that either by permitting or regulatory fiat, we create more of a hurdle for these companies to be able to bring their product to the market.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you to the chairwoman, ranking member, and thank you, Secretary Perry, for being here today. Last year, I asked you about exascale and quantum computing, and today I'd like to start my questions on the existential threat of climate change and the department's efforts to accelerate our transition to clean energy. Secretary Perry, the fourth National Climate Assessment makes clear that greenhouse gas emissions from human activities are the most substantial factor in global warming over the past 6 decades. The Department of Energy is one of the 13 federal agencies in the U.S. Global Change Research Program that contributed to the assessment. So, Secretary Perry, did the Department of Energy sign off on the findings of the fourth National Climate Assessment? I'm going to make it easy. This is a yes or no question because I want to get through several questions. They did, okay. And do you agree that the National Climate Assessment is the result of collaborative, peer-reviewed effort across federal agencies compiled by the nation's top scientists? Again, that's yes or no. Do you agree that it's a, okay. And according to the assessment, fossil fuel combustion accounts for 77% of our nation's total greenhouse gas emissions. Do you agree with this finding in the assessment?
Yeah. That one I've gotten to the point of, I know you're reading off, I mean, you're reading a technical report, and if that's what the technical report says, here's what I will share with you, that the climate's changing, man's having an impact, and as I've stated before, you know, I welcome a thoughtful conversation with anyone on how we can clean up the environment. You know, no matter which side of the aisle you may be on here. What we're focused on at the department is coming up with new innovation, new technology that will help us address this issue of the climate.
I appreciate that, Mr. Secretary. I have some more questions, and I'm going to ask you about that. So the assessment also identified that without a rapid decarbonization of the world's energy systems over the next few decades, it is unlikely that we'll be able to reach the 2 degrees Celsius warming target that was set in the Paris Climate Accord. Do you agree with that, in the finding in the assessment as well?
Here's what I'd like to do. I know you got a lot of questions you want to ask me that are yes or no, but I'd really like to get Paul DeBar to share with you what Fatih Birol, who's the head of the International Energy Agency, said within the last 30 days about the decarbonization of the planet.
Well, I'd like you to submit that for the record because this is your time here today. So also, Mr. Secretary, last year the Natural Resources Defense Council sent a letter to this committee outlining the failure of the Department's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, or EERE, to spend the funds that were appropriated by Congress in fiscal year 2018. So the President's fiscal year 2020 budget request outlines the administration's plans to reprogram $353 million in prior year balances from EERE to help pay for fiscal year 2020 programs. The Impoundment Control Act requires the administration to obligate funds when Congress appropriates money to the executive branch. And last year, this committee learned through a GAO request from Chairwoman Johnson that the administration violated the Impoundment Control Act in 2017 by withholding 1/3 of the budget for ARPA-E. So you can understand why we're concerned about the same issue occurring at EERE. So the Impoundment Control Act does allow agencies to withhold obligation of funds when a deferral or rescission is requested by the President and approved by Congress. So Secretary Perry, are you aware of any deferrals or rescissions that Congress has approved for fiscal year 2018 or 19 funding for DOE programs?
I am not.
How do the total number of funding opportunity announcements for EERE in 19 compare to the number of announcements issued in fiscal year 18 to date?
You want to take a
And Mr. Secretary, this is you're the witness here today. I'd like you to answer the question.
Yeah, well, I'm going to refer to my expert then, if you don't mind, ma'am.
We issued all the FOAs for EERE, and they're in the middle of submittals and reviews right now for 2019.
Mr. Secretary, will you recommit here today to distributing DOE's appropriated funds for 2019 and 2020 in accordance with congressional intent? I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cloud.
Thank you, Secretary, for being here. It's good to see you. It's great to have a Texan heading up the Department of Energy.
Thank you.
I want to thank you, first of all, for your thoughtful written report. I found it personally refreshing, actually, that we had a comprehensive report that sought to recognize the security challenges facing us, and recognize the breakthroughs that we need to make for advancement, but also kept in mind that we are supposed to be, as the chair said, responsibly use the taxpayer's dollar. And while we do want to make sure DOE employees' morale is high, I think we should also make sure that the taxpayers' morale is high. And with $22 trillion hanging around their neck, I think most of us realize that their morale is not as high as it should be. I represent, of course, the 27th District of Texas. So first of all, I want to thank you for the work in helping with the Port of Corpus Christi, seeing the first crude shipment come out of the United States in a while out of that port was really great for the United States as we're making this transition to an energy dominant nation, which you've been so key in. I'm also home to the South Texas Project Electric Generating Station, and I know we're committed to Americans' leadership in nuclear energy to help deliver clean, reliable power to the people of Texas and across the country. Much of America's existing fleet of reactors is aging, with many of their nuclear plants nearing the end of their 40-year license. The Department of Energy is researching ways to promote the longevity and safety of nuclear plants through its light water reactor sustainability program. The program works with universities and companies like STP, South Texas Project, on research. Could you provide an update on the work being conducted through the LWRS program?
You want to, you know which one that is? Mr. Cloud, if I could, let's take that one for the record and,
Okay.
and get you the proper information and give it to you and the rest of the committee members in writing.
I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Your written report touched on rare earth minerals, and you know, there's a lot of talk about alternative forms of energy having an all-above approach. Could you discuss what DOE might be doing in terms of rare earth minerals? I mean, we know China controls 70% of them, so as we look to alternative forms of energy, as we're becoming a energy dominant nation that's finally independent in energy, we don't want to trade that for dependence on rare earth minerals. Also, of course, rare earth minerals have, as your report mentions, extreme national security, military applications, and those sorts of things.
And I think that's very, very succinct that I want to stop and draw a line right there and say that that's looking backwards. And some of the innovation and technology that's going on at the department at this particular point in time may shed some light on that dealing with rare earth minerals that are controlled by maybe some countries that don't necessarily have our best interest in mind may not be as big a challenge as what we thought it was 12 months ago. And part of that reason is because of the research that's going on at our national labs. And I'm going to, again, ask Paul to kind of share with you just because he's fresh out of seeing some of this, and it has to do with battery storage. And the progress, Ms. Fletcher, that's being made on battery storage is really fascinating. And I've always said that battery storage is the holy grail. If we're able to get to that point where we can use our renewables, solar and wind in particular, to power these batteries that have long-time storage. And what we're finding now is that the elements that are being used to create some of these batteries are not rare earth minerals, and they're elements that we have right here in the United States. So we're going to be in control of our future substantially more on the battery storage. Paul, if you just kind of give them a little glimpse of what's going on here, and I think that's pretty exciting stuff.
So a couple of examples. Obviously, the complex is just to a large degree a very large R&D business. And so in this particular area, for example, in batteries that are not lithium-ion, beyond lithium-ion batteries that not only have tremendous improvements in performance at 3 to 5 times, but are made out of elements, as the Secretary said, that we don't have to source it from places that we have more of a challenge. The second thing, as an example, that we did with the support of this committee is the recycling battery announcement that we made at Argonne National Lab, where we announced the first research for recycling batteries. So the materials that you were talking about that have to be potentially sourced from other places in the world, we're looking at, with all these batteries being used in the economy now, how we could reuse those rather than needing to source that from other locations.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you.
You mentioned on the electric grid, and I think in 2017 you produced or the DOE, I should say, produced a report on listing recommendations that we should do to prepare for an EMP attack. Do you know of any progress that's been made?
Yes, sir. A substantial amount of it. In April of this year, DOE issued a $35 million cybersecurity for energy delivery systems research research call to the federally funded research and development centers. And they're working exactly on what you're talking about there, the resiliency, the reliability of the nation's energy infrastructure. And they're looking at a host of different ways to, we actually stood up an office that we refer to as CSER Cybersecurity and the emergency response that's headed up. And so, again, thank you for the funding of that. I think it's very timely. And the previous that I talked about, this $35 million is going to be used for testing that can be used to verify and validate operational technology, equipment, software. And there was also a funding opportunity announcement that was released in the month prior, in March, to establish a cyber manufacturing institute. And that one's co-managed by our CSER office and EERE to mitigate cybersecurity threats. And so there's a lot of movement in that space. The DOE, our national labs, and our private sector partners are all engaged, I think, in a very constructive way to send the message to our citizens, to those that operate our electric and power systems, that we're doing everything possible to protect them against both cyber threats, physical threats, and national or natural disasters as well. I know Florida, I think your governor's about to do an announcement on infrastructure resiliency and what have you. Our two states have, time to time we get more natural disasters than we'd really like to have, but how we build that infrastructure and how we develop that resiliency of the grid is very, very important. Not just because of the cyber side of this that 10 years ago that wasn't a problem. It is today.
Thank you very much, Mr. McNerney.
Well, I thank the chair. I thank the secretary for coming today. And I do want to say I worked at Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque. I worked at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And I have Livermore labs right outside of my district. I'm well aware of the quality and quantity of labs, and I encourage you to support those labs as much as you possibly can. Secretary Perry, do you believe that research on climate science is needed, or do you think that the climate science is settled?
I think we're continuing to add to the body of science that's out there.
Do you think we need to continue to work on that? What makes the DOE labs uniquely qualified among the national science agencies to conduct research on climate?
Well, partly because we've historically been engaged in it. So when you go back and look at the history of of climate science, DOE and their scientists have been involved with it. There is a FOA out right now, Congressman, that that is going to, it's a selection that DOE issued yesterday on climate modeling. And I think this is just another example of how DOE's role in the predictive modeling of what's going on in the environment, these severe storms that we're seeing now.
Secretary, I know you're not intentionally filibustering, but
Yeah. No, I'm just excited about the
I am too.
what's
but,
going on in DOE.
so I strongly urge you to continue to double down on climate research,
Yep.
Including climate intervention research, because we're going to have those tools available. Secretary Perry, one way to make energy from renewable sources that are remote available to load centers across the country is to better connect them with what we call interconnection seams. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory has completed a study on this. However, the committee staff has informed me that the release of the report that contains findings from this study has been delayed without explanation, and the authors have been told not to discuss it publicly. Are you aware that the limits have been placed on the authors in discussing results of this study publicly, and whether these limits remain in place today?
I'm not.
Okay. So will you make a commitment to make this publicly, this report available?
Yes, sir. We'll circle back and find out where that originated from and make it right.
Thank you, Secretary. I appreciate that. In April of 2018, the DOE canceled a $46 million funding opportunity announcement on solar R&D just days before the winners were to be announced. Can you or anyone on your staff explain why that was pulled at the last minute?
We'll go research it, sir, and get back to you.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate also your comments on artificial intelligence. Mr. Olson and I are co-chairs of the Artificial Intelligence Caucus, and we're going to continue to pursue that subject with vigor. And I know the national labs have a lot to offer on that, so I urge you to keep those labs well-funded and keep the morale high at those labs, yes, by not threatening their funding year after year. And with that, I'm going to yield back.
Thank you.
I'm going to yield back to the 3 minutes that the prior speaker took.
Thank you very much, Mr. Olson.
I thank the chair, and howdy, Secretary Perry.
Don't go over your time, Pete.
Never my intention. I want to start off, sir, with something that's very important to Fort Bend County, a town called Needville, Texas. I want to give you a personal invitation from a young Texas lady we both know and admire. Her name is Katie Vosick.
Yep.
You remember you met her at President Trump's first speech before Congress. She fell out of a live oak tree, broke her spine, has not walked for 3 years. As you can see now, she's a fellow Aggie, proud Aggie. And she wants to thank you personally for meeting with her and inspiring her to get moving forward and going to College Station. So on her behalf, maybe find some time to come down to Needville, Texas. The J Cafe had the best chicken fried steak and pecan pie in all of Texas. And maybe pop over to the Petronova power plant right across the way from Needville. So if you have some time, come down. I'd love to have you come down.
You don't even have to use the extra bait of chicken fried steak to get me there.
Thank you. Now I have a question that's very important in my hometown of Sugar Land, Texas. It involves the NNSA. As you know, the NNSA picks up some nuclear waste that's been used by industry and then disposes of it. They send it out to a site called the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, the WIPP. Radioactive americium-241 is needed for safe drilling. This is one of the nuclear waste. It is a known carcinogen. Usually what happens, NNSA picks it up, and they send it off for safe storage somewhere in America. but there's a very small amount of that mineral that is picked up by NNSA but can't be kept here because it came from foreign sources originally. It's an identical fuel, identical. We can't dispose of it because it came from another country. And so we have these sites all across our country right now, sprinkled with this radioactive waste. One site, Secretary Perry, is half a mile from my son's high school, Fort Bend Christian. In 2015, they had a small release of americium and cesium-137. Workers took that home on their clothes. I know you'd like to change the law to make sure we dispose of this carcinogen without regard to where it came from. So are you aware of this? And how can we help you to make this common sense, dispose, and not delay?
Yes, sir. Congressman Olson, we are familiar with this, and I apologize for turning my back to you and asking a question, but because I wanted to make sure that I was correct in the assumption that I was making, that this is going to require a statutory change, of which you just mentioned, and we will assist you any way we can from the standpoint of using science at the labs or what have you to back up, because I agree with you that these types of materials do need to be put in an appropriate disposal places, and so the idea that just because it was produced in a foreign country versus the exact same element that is produced at a national labs reactor for these isotopes, and there's a host of these isotopes that we use in medical and obviously for the oil and gas industry, but we agree that the statute needs to be changed, because it clearly, I think it's the old Land Use Act that prohibits any foreign produced elements of being placed in like the whip. So we would support your effort there, and anything that we can do from a scientific standpoint to back that up, consider it available.
It sounds like I have to call the ball. 3 down, cleared to land. This is our job, not your job. We're on that, sir. Thank you so much. The final question, very brief, is about AI. As Mr. McNary mentioned, we are the co-chairs of the House AI Caucus, and your video was awesome. It shows the potential future about AI. Can you discuss briefly about AI's potential for protecting our grid, protecting our pipelines, protecting our national labs? I mean, this is the future. And how are you guys doing that DOE to make sure we utilize?
I can't do it briefly because it's just such a broad, but I think at some time in the future, let me just leave it at this. I don't think there is a field that the government is participating in that has any more potential to have bigger impact on our citizens than artificial intelligence. These supercomputers that the department operates, 2 of the fastest, 5 of the 10 fastest that we operate, and our next level computers are going to be operating the exascale computer that's coming online at Argonne over in Mr. Foster's district in 2021 will do 1 billion transactions per second. That's the speed of which that's anywhere between, I think it's up to 50 times faster than the computers we have today. I mean, it's fascinating work. So the AI, machine learning that's coming with that, we're going to find answers to challenges that we had no idea we were going to be able to address in the very near future.
Thank you. Final request, beat Alabama. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ms. Horn.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and Mr. Secretary. Thank you for being here. And I want to start off by framing this, that issues of workforce development, STEM, building our workforce of tomorrow, as well as the cutting edge technology development are all very important, both to me and to my district, and clearly energy is a big issue in Oklahoma. As it is across the country. So I want to start with ARPA-E and the funding because I think we have to have a conversation about the role of technology development. In its 10-year history, ARPA-E has funded high-risk, high-reward energy innovation projects that create cleaner energy and economic growth. And the important thing about that, of the 145 projects that have been supported by ARPA-E, they have attracted $2.9 billion in follow-on funding, follow-on private sector funding, and 76 of these projects have gone on to form new companies. I say that to ask, in the proposed budget, it basically zeroes out ARPA-E, and in the balance of public-private partnerships, we're looking at the cutting-edge development of government investment leading to follow-on actual companies and economic growth and development. So my question is, what are you doing as the Secretary of Energy to communicate the clear successes that this program has had to the President and his budget team?
Mostly sitting in front of committees like this, defending what ARPA-E has historically done. So, and I will continue to do that. I recognize that from time to time we're not always on the same page of the hymn book, and this is one of those.
I hope you've raised that, because it's such an important way to encourage that economic growth and development by investing in cutting edge. Now, turning for a moment to cybersecurity and manufacturing, which are also topics that are critical, and I think that we need to talk about. The Manufacturing USA program, of course, you probably know it's a network of advanced manufacturing technology areas that have the goal of establishing American leadership in manufacturing. And with respect to cybersecurity, which is absolutely critical in high-tech manufacturing, the Manufacturing Times Digital, or MDX, which is a program that's funded by the Department of Defense, is focused on improving cybersecurity and digital manufacturing, and that is their focus. And on March 26th of this year, your department announced a $70 million award for cybersecurity for a new Manufacturing USA Institute. So, Secretary, my question is, why the duplication of effort in those projects, which are basically the same? And have you encouraged your staff and the DOE to work with the DoD, because this is very important, but in terms of streamlining our programs and not duplicating effort, why the duplication here?
Yeah. Congresswoman Harm, may I ask Paul DeBar to weigh in here just a second? I think he may be able to enlighten us all a little better than me telling you from a high level.
So we work with Undersecretary Griffin, who's in charge of research at DoD, quite a bit, as well as our other peers at NASA and NSF and the others. We each focus on different areas. To be direct, DoD focuses on lethality applications. The Department of Energy is more about energy and about science. And so there's different applications for different aspects. DoD, for example, does not focus on cybersecurity for the grid. They focus on cybersecurity for what they do. So there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of overlap in their lab research and our lab research. But there's some very practical points of research that are different. That's hard to fully get into here today.
So just a quick follow up on that. Did you coordinate with the DoD to build the scope of this program to not overlap, or they're overlapping of the manufacturing? Because it's a whole new institute. That's my question. It's a whole new institute. Are there not other ways that this could be coordinated?
For this particular institute, I'm not certain if there was a discussion specifically with Undersecretary Griffin's scope. But we do it all the time with him across quantum, around AI, around hypersonics. So this particular one, I can't answer, and we can follow up with you on that.
I would appreciate that, and I yield back the balance. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Secretary Perry for being here today. One of the challenges that I think we always face in this committee is connecting our basic research, which I think is absolutely critical to the future of our nation, to everyday constituent issues and things that folks on the ground are feeling on a day-to-day basis. And kind of with that in mind, especially when we're talking about things like quantum computing and AI and big data, and these are important buzzwords, but again, how do we connect it to the day-to-day? And one of the big issues across our country and in my district is the issue of veteran suicides. The number that's been most widely circulated is 20 veteran suicides a day. I know that the DOE and the VA have engaged in a partnership to solve just that with the use of some of our technology. I know my colleague, Mr. Norman, has introduced legislation to reauthorize that partnership. And I guess I'd like to just turn it over to you just to hear from your perspective. How is the partnership working? What are you working on specifically with respect to the VA, and how can we do even better?
Thank you, and Mr. Gonzalez, thank you for your serious passion about this issue. Probably every one of us in here, because this isn't just about veterans.
Right.
This is about our kids. It's about our colleagues. It's about the citizens of this country. And Mr. Tonto, you and I talked about this. Congressman McNerney and I have talked about it. The importance of what we potentially have in front of us now because of the breakthroughs that we're seeing in the partnerships that are being created between historically disparate agencies of government. Nobody ever thought DOE was supposed to be involved in traumatic brain injury or PTSD, post-traumatic stress, or CTE, and what we are showing people is that we have a real role to play in this. As a matter of fact, we may have one of the most important roles to play because of that computing capacity that we have and the ability for us to partner with the VA in the sense of working with the VA, the data that they have, and they know they can trust us. No offense to maybe some of the private sector folks who have big computers and what have you, but I'm pretty sure that the VA and those veterans know that they can trust the Department of Energy not to allow this information to be used for some other purpose. So we are going to continue to look for ways to, you all have funded a line item at the DOE now, if I'm correct in that. And this program is funding, and it's a partnership, if I may, the University of California, San Francisco, Dr. Jeffrey Manley out there, finding some just really big breakthroughs dealing with brain science. So this is important work.
Fantastic. And as you may also be aware, I recently joined my colleagues on this committee to introduce the Bipartisan Securing American Science and Technology Act, which is designed to improve our ability to protect federally funded research from foreign espionage, cyber attacks, and theft. I think it's a huge issue. We're going to invest in our technology. We want to make darn sure that nobody's here stealing it.
Yep.
And so I applaud your efforts on the talent program. And again, I was hoping you could maybe provide an update on what the policy is and how you see it evolving going forward.
Could I ask?
Absolutely.
So the first thing that we just implemented, as the Secretary mentioned in his opening, was to ban people working in the National Lab Complex to work for foreign talent programs from China, Russia, North Korea, or Iran. And so we'll be giving people who are currently employed in the lab complex working for the Chinese state as being co-hired, that's no longer going to be allowed, and they have to make a decision of either working for them or working for us. By the way, this is very consistent with the cutting-edge universities, where a lot of universities around this country are beginning to realize that this is a conflict of interest for them. So we're very consistent with what the university systems are looking at. The second thing that we're looking at is whether we should be developing a list of technologies that we're developing in the national labs, and whether that list should be included that before we do any work with anyone from those 4 countries, that we have an extra review. So this would not be a ban, but this would be an extra review for key technologies such as quantum, such as new generation of batteries, and so on.
Fantastic. And I guess my final comment, I would encourage you to think, when I think of the innovation space, there's a funding component and there's a talent component and some other components, but not only should we be about making sure that folks aren't playing for both sides, but how do we attract even more great talent here to the U.S.? And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes. And thank you again, Mr. Secretary, for joining us this morning. Obviously, the agency has many daunting challenges before it, and very timely. So great to have you here. Every year, the EPA publishes data on economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions. In 2017, the transportation sector was the highest emitting sector. but not too far behind it, at 22% of U.S. emissions, was industry. Emissions from this sector are expected to grow in the near term, and many industrial processes are considered to be difficult to decarbonize without readily available or cost-effective alternatives. Despite over one-half of our economy's climate emissions coming from transportation and manufacturing, the majority of our federal R&D spending at DOE focuses on reducing emissions from the electricity sector. While these are critical and indeed worthy investments, I also believe DOE must support innovation in cleaner energy, not just cleaner electricity. Would you agree that DOE can help to develop cost-competitive technologies that reduce the greenhouse gas emissions out there, while ensuring that domestic, energy-intensive manufacturers continue to be leaders in innovation and remain globally competitive?
Yes, sir, and I think our labs are engaged in some of those efforts as well. You know, the non-point source pollution issue. While I was the governor of Texas, I had the opportunity to work with and put into place some programs that did exactly that. Big fleet engines, for instance, the TERP program. Congressman Weber, if you'll remember, that was a reduction in emissions from old, inefficient fleet-type engines, and we gave a tax credit. And again, this wasn't on the innovation and the technology side, which is what DOE does, but it's a maybe it's an idea that those of you in Congress could take a look at from the standpoint of give some incentives to states to implement programs like this. But we will continue to look for ways to. I'm really proud of what the U.S. has done from the standpoint of reducing emissions. I mean, we're leading the world in the total reduction of emissions. And a lot of that's because of.
But then we were swinging back up. So.
But I think that's you know, most of my folks at the department tell me that is a temporary bump back up. And again, as we transition, I think it's important for us to go where I can go sell American LNG into the European theater and remove old, inefficient coal burning plants for cleaner burning American LNG. I think that's just good all the way around. If I can get the Indians and the Chinese to recognize that we'll be making some progress in the world.
We do that at the common table, which
yes, sir.
we need to stay with. There are many technology options we can explore to decarbonize manufacturing. This includes cogeneration, combined heat and power and waste heat to power, which can greatly improve energy efficiency at our industrial facilities. Mr. Secretary, is supporting greater adoption of cogeneration a priority for the department?
I don't know whether I'd put it as a priority. It's one of the areas that we care about. Just like over in Congressman Weber's district, there's I think it's in your district, where the Petronova facility is. It's in Mr. Olson's. But the point is, innovation and technology is the key to. You know, again, I don't want to backtrack here, but 15 years ago, they told us we'd found all the energy resources that we had in this country, and they were wrong, because innovators in technology, and I will suggest that the innovation in technology is going to be found through the artificial intelligence and the machine learning that we have the power to control at the Department of Energy because of the funding by this committee.
Well, while cogeneration is critical, it will not solve challenges with process emissions. So other advancements such as carbon capture may be necessary. And I understand that the Office of Fossil Energy has done substantive work in developing this technology. And while CCS is not yet cost-effective in power generation, I believe it will ultimately be necessary for certain industrial applications. And what will you do to encourage collaborations amongst relevant offices at DOE to leverage existing resources and programs to ensure that CCS for industrial purposes are being given proper consideration and funding?
I have made that one a priority, sir. And up to and including in the Clean Energy Ministerial, we got CCUS put in as a priority at a global level at the Clean Energy Ministerial that was initially held in China and this last year in Vancouver. So we're making not just progress here in the United States. We're seeing some global saluting of that flag, if you will, by our partners around the globe.
But again, I would suggest it needs to be applied to industrial emissions. With that, I have exhausted my time and will now recognize Representative Baird for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. We do appreciate the research funding that you mentioned in your initial comments. But your department has an Office of Science which funds the bioenergy research centers, and they conduct coordinated and geographically diverse research in support of developing a viable and sustainable domestic biofuel and bioproducts industry from dedicated bioenergy crops. So each BRC is led by a DOE national laboratory or leading a U.S. research university and is staffed by multidisciplinary stakeholders in science, engineering, and industry. So as a scientist and a farmer, I support the biofuels and the bioproducts industry, and I'm particularly interested in the research and development that can diversify these industries, and that helps them to produce more products while lowering their cost and reducing their environmental impact. So my question is, what do you see in fiscal year 2020 and beyond to support bioenergy research centers and to expand their important research?
Mr. Baird, we are very supportive of these bioenergy research centers, and each of them are led by a DOE lab or a top university, and sometimes even in partnership. And they're basically designed to lay out this scientific groundwork for new bio-based economy. And well, I'll give you an example of maybe some in your districts. The following centers were selected based on a open competition. Great Lakes Bio Research Center, that's up in Madison, and they're partnering with Michigan State. There's another at Oak Ridge National Lab. There's another at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. There's a Center for Bioenergy and Bioproducts Innovation, and that's at University of Illinois Urbana at Champaign. So I think there's been over 2,500 peer-reviewed publications came out of that. There's been 1,000+ invention disclosures that came out of it. So from the standpoint of what's your return on the investment, I think it's been pretty good, sir.
Thank you. I have one other question, and that deals with looking in another area. Now, my colleague, Mr. Gonzalez, made reference to the Veterans Administration, but and I recently co-sponsored some legislation along with my colleague, Representative Weston, to prioritize opioid research at the National Science Foundation. And I know you've indicated the use of the DOE supercomputing capacity to tackle the big data challenges, often in the healthcare space. So would you mind elaborating again on what kind of role you think the DOE might play in helping the federal healthcare agencies, including the Veterans Administration, again, to better understand the opioid crisis?
Yes, sir. The good news is we're making some good progress. Mr. Walls, back probably mid-2000s, 06, 07, when the War on Terror was really at one of its apexes. Being the governor of Texas, I had the opportunity to go to Brooks Army Medical Center on a fairly more regular than I'd like to have been going, to young men and women who were burned. And then at that particular point in time, we saw our federal government being rather liberal in the dispensing of opioids. And, half a dozen years later, we figure out that we basically created a whole generation of young people who were dependent upon these things, and we started pulling back from them. and this was probably 3 or 4 years ago, BAMC had decreased by 90% the amount of opioids that they were given to the young people that were coming in and dealing. They were coming up with some different ways to deal with it. With that said, we've still got a real opioid crisis in this country. We think it may be genetically driven to some degree. So again, the supercomputers and our ability to do genetic testing of some of these populations out there, and again, doing it in a way that the people know that this information is going to be safe and secure. Department of Energy is going to play a very vital role in being a partner, working with NIH, working with the VA, working with some of our private sector partners and our university systems to, I think we will find a solution to the opioid epidemic that we have in this country. And this will happen, my projection is this will happen sooner rather than later.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Dr. Foster.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Secretary Perry. You know, I just want to tell you how much I enjoyed having the privilege of escorting you around the 2 crown jewels of the National Laboratory System, our Argonne National Laboratory, and actually, I think there was a slide that was going to be put up here in a moment. If we could put it on the screen, please. Yeah, and so this is, you know, one of the many hats I wear is as the co-chair of the National Labs Caucus, where we are also planning to be visiting all 17 of the national laboratories, and I'll be leading as large a congressional delegation as I can corral. The first of these, shortly after National Lab Day, we're going to be heading to the New Mexico National Labs, Los Alamos, Sandia, also White Sands, where they do anti-missile, directed energy beam work, and the Alamogordo Trinity Test Site, where the first nuclear weapon was detonated about 75 years ago now. The next one is going to be in the Bay Area, where Representatives Jerry McNerney and Zoe Lofgren on this committee will be the hosts of a visit to the Bay Area labs, Livermore, Sandia, LBL, and SLAC. Following that, we are visiting the crown jewels. I'll be hosting the Illinois lab, a visit to the Illinois labs at Argonne National Lab that I represent, and which, by the way, one of the things that they have done at their synchrotron light source is to use them to directly image the molecules that are involved in opioid receptors in the brain, these G-coupled protein receptors. This is Nobel Prize winning research that allows us to directly image the molecules involved in opiate addiction. And one of the very wonderful things that are often not talked about. And of course, Fermi National Lab, where I worked for 23 years before getting into this insane business. We're also, then later on, Congressman Ed Perlmutter will enthusiastically host a visit to the Denver area and Western labs. And at times to be scheduled, we're also, the 2 Republican co-chairs of the National Lab Caucus will be hosting visits to Oak Ridge and Savannah by Chuck Fleischman. Lee Zeldin will be hosting a visit to the Brookhaven National Lab. And we've actually already had our first visit, where Chairman Lamb has invited us to go see Nettle. Yep. And so, you know, I understand why you enjoyed so much visiting these 17 labs, and it's really essential that the entire Congress recognizes the importance of these. And so, and any opportunity for Paul DeBar, you or any of your staff to join these, you're obviously more than welcome. Now, in my remaining time, I would like to discuss the issue of low-enriched versus high-enriched uranium. You know, this is something that comes up in many guises. You know, you mentioned the crusty work. You also recently, signed a letter where the Navy was trying to discourage Congress from pursuing something that it's pursued for quite a while now, which is to encourage the Navy to use to look at the possibility of using low-enriched uranium in its propulsion reactors. Now, I'd just like to emphasize the reason that 30 Nobel Prize winners have signed a letter advocating the minimization of low-enriched uranium. There's a reason that we don't test nuclear weapons. You know, if we did test nuclear weapons, our nuclear arsenal would be safer, cheaper, more secure, more reliable. But we do not test nuclear weapons because if the rest of the world followed us in that example, it would be a national security disaster. The situation is identical for low-enriched and high-enriched uranium. If we start using
high-enriched uranium, weapons-grade uranium, in applications where it is not strictly needed, and the rest of the world follows us. Things like propulsion reactors for icebreakers, or you name it, things that they have the right to do under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It will be a disaster for non-proliferation and national security, because any country that has a reactor's worth of high-enriched uranium has everything they need in terms of fissile material to make multiple nuclear weapons. And so we've worked as a country for 40 years minimizing worldwide use of this, and we will continue to engage with you to make sure that on every time that we have the option of using low-enriched or high-enriched uranium, that we choose the safe one and not use weapons grade. Yep. So I just, we've already communicated on this, and we'll be continuing.
Yes, sir.
Well, and I have a grand total of 23 seconds left. So I guess I just want to see how you view, after having visited, you've now completed the 17 labs, what are the things you'd really like to get done organizationally that will really improve their effectiveness?
Yes, sir. Let me just add, as I don't know if I would make any changes organizationally to the structure that we have. I think these labs, I got some pretty good advice from former Secretary, former Governor of New Mexico, Bill Richardson. He said, "Perry, don't mess with the national labs." And that's frankly some pretty good advice. For the record, I would like to invite all of you to come out to your neck of the woods in October of this year for an X-Lab event that we're having, which is where we bring in the private sector that are partnering with the national labs on a host of different areas. I mean, it is some fascinating stuff. And again, we don't have time for me to put on my cheerleader hat and talk about these national labs. But whether you've got one in your district or not, if you have the opportunity to go to a national lab, please do it. It is some of the most brilliant, capable men and women who are making, I think, more difference in America than any single group of people in this country.
Thank you, and you've been a wonderful ambassador to science, to an administration that makes that not always an easy job. So
yes,
thank
sir.
you so much.
And Mr. Foster, let me just say, the timeliness of this X-Lab event in Argonne in October is on artificial intelligence.
Thank you very much. Mr. Balderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here this morning. Mr. Secretary, approximately 25% of my district in Ohio is rural.
Yes, sir. There you are.
For my constituents to access a quality education in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, STEM, is critical. Many of the job openings that cannot be filled in rural Ohio are STEM-focused. As Secretary of Energy, what are you doing this year, and what will be done in fiscal year 2020 to ensure that the Department's STEM outreach and engagement activities reach the rural communities like mine?
Yes, sir. One of the areas that we're focused is on the DOE's Office of Economic Impact and Diversity, and that program is created to expand the participation of individuals who historically may not have had the same opportunities. I can speak a little bit of historically to this. I grew up in a place, my high school, my school, grades 1 through 12, had 115 kids. I probably wouldn't be sitting here in front of you if I'd gone to a bigger school, because I could have learned how to use a slide rule and probably done a little better in organic chemistry, and I'd ended up being a veterinarian. Organic chemistry changed my life and made a pilot out of me. So anyway, enough of my personal travails. The point is that a lot of these rural communities haven't historically had access to some of the science, technology, engineering, and math programs that children really need to be successful. And this program is exactly focused on that. And Secretary, or I should say Undersecretary of Science, Paul DeBar, and our Chief Commercialization Officer are currently working with our national labs again and the University of Chicago to do a roundtable this summer to explore some pathways of continuing to harness these kids with this technology, and we're you know, I'm pretty excited. We've got a program called Making Nuclear Cool Again at the department, where we're reaching out and helping to, you know, again, when I was going to college, being a nuclear engineer was a pretty cool thing, and it's lost a lot of its shine, if you will. So again, whether it's small modular reactors, whether it's the micro reactors we're talking about, bringing the nuclear energy interest back into that area and preparing young people to be the scientists and technicians that we're going to need. You're going to require these STEM programs, and rural America absolutely does not need to be overlooked any longer.
All right, thank you very much for that answer. My final question is, I'm honored to be the lead Republican co-sponsor of Congresswoman Stevens' bill, the American Manufacturing Leadership Act. The bill passed out of this committee last month and underscores my support for making strategic investments in advanced manufacturing R&D. Mr. Secretary, if this bipartisan legislation was enacted and the department had the ability to open an additional center of manufacturing innovation, what manufacturing challenges would you look to research?
Well, there's a host of areas that advanced manufacturing is making some housing, and you think about Secretary Carson actually had on the mall, I think within the last 30 days, some manufactured housing, and you know, when we talked about, Mr. Baird, where I'm from, manufactured housing generally was on wheels. And that's not the case anymore. Because of our additive manufacturing processes that we have today, we're able to build some housing that is highly efficient, that is cheaper substantially than, so advanced manufacturing in places that you don't historically think about. Automotives, we're literally building a nuclear reactor and the parts for that nuclear reactor out of additive manufacturing. I mean, it's stunning the progress that's being made in that arena. So advanced manufacturing office is, you know, obviously got our attention, and it is another of those priorities that we have.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Byer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, very much. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. You know, DOE has robust programs that have helped demonstrate carbon capture technology on an ethanol plant, on a hydrogen production facility, on a coal-fired power plant. But we're enjoying this explosion of natural gas, the shale gas revolution. What is DOE doing for carbon capture on natural gas plants and on other things like cement manufacturing?
Yes, sir. As I said, and I'm not going to rehash this again, but we've really focused on, I think one of the first projects I went to as Secretary was the Petronova plant outside of Houston. I think it's in Fort Bend County, and where 90+% of the emissions are captured. They're then sent over to be used in an enhanced oil recovery process in an oil field, I think 80 miles away in outside of Victoria, Texas. So,
and what kind of plant is Petronova?
Petronova is a coal-powered plant.
Okay, so those are, you know, those, we're not building any new ones, we're closing the old ones down. What are we doing with the natural gas plants?
Paul, you want to take a...
Mr.
So this is actually one of the most exciting things that we're doing.
Paul, if I could focus on the Secretary, that'd
Yeah,
be great. Thanks. If you don't know, Mr. Secretary, I'll move on.
Well,
the National Academies...
Here's what I'm interested. I'm interested in trying to pass on information the best I can to you. And if I don't have the most timely, I'd like to use Paul, because he gets out into that area more than I do.
But we have greater access to Paul. Yeah. We can do that for the record. We only get you once
I hope
a year,
you've got good access to me. All you got to do is call.
Well, I do. The National Academies have pointed out that we need negative emissions technologies, pulling carbon out of the air, out of the ocean. How How has the National Academy's assessment been received by the Department of Energy, and what are you doing about the negative emissions technology?
Yeah. Here, let me just give you a little statement that I think I found really interesting. Fatih Birol is the head of the International Energy Agency in Paris. I don't think there's anybody that I've been dealing with that's got a better handle on, that's as non-political as he just looks at the facts and what have you. And he said if we eliminate 100% of the passenger cars that are running on gasoline today, transition every one of them to electric, we would still need 81% of the oil and gas production that is occurring in the world to be able to continue on developing, manufacturing, running our fleet engines and what have you. So we know we've got some real challenges here from the standpoint of how are we going to deal with there are folks that are talking about completely switching over their fleets to renewables. And that, I'm not going to argue.
Mr. Secretary, can I interrupt? I asked specifically about pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and out of the oceans.
Yeah.
Is DOE working on this? This is one of the National Academies, right?
Yeah, I think there's some Oregon State projects that are going on the ocean side of it, correct? It's my understanding.
Okay, well, maybe we'll follow up with Paul later.
Yeah.
One more question. You mentioned a number of times about artificial intelligence and your excitement about machine learning. What questions is the Department of Energy attempting to answer with machine learning?
You don't have enough time to get the answer to that for me or anybody else sitting here because it's across the board. It's things as interesting as concussions. And we've historically been taught that there are 3 levels of concussion: mild, there's mild, moderate, and severe. And because of the work that's been done at the University of California, San Francisco, with a program that we're involved with, their Department of Neuroscience, Dr. Jeffrey Manley, will tell you there's 28. And that's because of artificial intelligence and machine learning and these supercomputers that we're running at the department. So, I mean, that's just in a very slender area of brain science.
So you're using artificial intelligence to solve problems across the board, not specifically Department of Energy questions.
Right.
This Department of Energy as a resource rather than energy questions that are arising.
Right. But there are energy questions that are arising that we're being able to find solutions to because of this massive amount of data that we're able to crunch, if you will, and give us answers to questions that before we just didn't have the time and the computing capacity to get to.
Okay. And my time is up, but I appreciate perhaps through the Undersecretary answers to the questions about carbon capture and the shale gas. So thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your leadership. Look, I think that what's going on in the energy revolution in the United States of America is one of the great news stories, and maybe the news story of the 21st century. From the exports reaching 10 million barrels a day to export of LNG and shifting that entire industry, and then as a combat veteran, which my colleagues have heard me say on this committee, I can't tell you how many veterans, how many wounded warriors we have in Walter Reed, how many we've lost hauling diesel fuel across exposed supply lines, getting IED'd when many of those outposts, and in fact many portions of our military can and should be existing on renewables. So one of the things that I'm most excited about is solar, and where Florida is going with solar. One of my first visits was to a solar site that's built by Florida Power and Light, and its drive to have 30 million panels by 2030 with 10 gigawatts of electricity. I'm proud to say Florida has eclipsed California now in Q1 of 2019 with the most solar power installations for #1 in the country for new panels, and in the next 5 years should be #1 across the board. So I think the Sunshine State is living up to its name. My question, Mr. Secretary, is how do you see the department really sustaining the private sector growth? And as a conservative, I love it that it's the private sector leading the charge on this, but obviously it's a state issue, and Governor DeSantis has been a real leader. How do you see the department continuing to really embolden and empower the private sector, and particularly in solar, but renewables writ large?
Well, I look at our role as from the standpoint of continuing to fund the opportunities to have public-private partnerships, the commercialization of innovation and technology that's coming out of our national labs, for instance. I think a governor and a legislature in a particular state would be wise to look at ways for that to give incentives to companies to risk their capital, working with their universities, for instance, which is where, by and large, your state's innovation and technology will come from. Looking for ways to partner up with the DOE, where you have the trifecta, if you will, of the state, the federal, and the local working together on some of these projects. So, and a great example of this, Florida Power just announced a 491 megawatt utility battery. I mean, that's massive. I mean, we're talking, and so with what you're doing on solar, and by the way, just for the record, solar just bypassed hydro, or was it, isn't that right? Solar just bypassed hydro as a total deliverer of power in this country. I mean, it's just some, the wind, the solar side of things are really making some good progress. And battery storage is, I think, as we talked about earlier, the holy grail of this.
Mr. Secretary, just in the interest of time, I'm glad that you mentioned resiliency. Again, my predecessor in this seat, now Governor DeSantis, has announced a chief science officer and is going to announce a chief resiliency officer. If there's anything I hear about from constituents, it's traffic and flooding. I've joined the National Flood Coalition. Where do you see, I know you mentioned a bit earlier, where do you see the department's help in resiliency issues? And then, just in the interest of time, if I could ask you to submit for the record, I know you mentioned the 17 labs. We've talked a lot about it. DOD also has 63 labs, and I'd be interested for the record how you coordinate. I mean, that's a lot of activity, and we need to spend those dollars efficiently, and just how you coordinate. And then also expanding the scope of ARPA-E. And I think if we get into some other areas like nuclear waste disposal and other things, then it may be more palatable across the board in terms of funding that organization.
And so let me back up here and just hit a few of the highlights of what you talked about. I think coordinating between agencies is really important. And one of the ways to do that is actually to show up and to know what other agencies are doing, rather than just kind of staying siloed in your own. I'm going to DARPA tomorrow to talk to them about some of the things that they're doing, some of the ways that we can partner with them, and quite frankly, to make sure that they're not duplicating some things. I think Paul did a pretty good job earlier to talk about, we kind of got different missions,
right?
DOD and DOE, but to make sure that we're not. And the resiliency side of what we talked about, CSER is really important in that we are the agency that has the responsibility for the reliability in the electrical sector. That's to make sure that the lights come on and it's protected. That is the DOE's responsibilities. Other agencies have some areas that kind of come in on the fringes. But DOE, that's their baby, making sure that we have that reliability, that resiliency in the electrical grid. So we're doing everything that we can, using those computers to model. And let me finish up by saying that the modeling side of what DOE is doing on the environment is going to pay, I think, some great dividends to your state, those states with those low-lying areas that are seeing flooding occurring, seeing the effect of this changing climate that we live in. And so, I think these are some important goals and roles of which DOE is.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm on Armed Services as well, so I certainly appreciate that coordination. And Madam Chair, I yield my time.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Secretary Governor Perry, for being with us today. It's always good to see you. It's no secret I'm really excited about solar energy, as is my colleague, Representative Waltz, to help our nation and, frankly, the world transition to a clean energy economy. Unfortunately, the administration proposed cuts to the solar office of more than 70%, and justified those cuts by saying that the office is conducting activities that can and should be carried out by the private sector. Last year, however, the administration established tariffs on solar cells, which supply the majority of U.S. solar companies. These tariffs have arguably raised prices, slowed the industry to a degree, and made it harder for solar companies to invest in their own research and development activities. And notably, two companies the tariffs were intended to help, Sonova, and Solar World, are now out of business as of just this month. Did the administration consult with solar developers, to your knowledge, about their ability to invest in research, development, and demonstration under the financial constraints of the tariffs?
Congressman Christ, I have no information that either acknowledging that or I have no knowledge about any correspondence between those companies and the administration.
Okay, thank you. Did you ever consult with others in the administration, such as maybe the trade representative, about how tariffs could negatively impact the ability of solar companies to invest in research and development?
Not necessarily just solar companies, but there have been a number of companies that I've had conversations with that I did share with Ambassador Lighthizer, the challenges that the tariffs as proposed were going to have on these U.S.-based companies, and frankly have had some success in being able to one of the things I do, one of my jobs as a governor, is to get people together and to open up some doors. I think it's wise for us to be able to say, hey, look, here's a constituent that I've got that's having some challenges with what you're proposing, and would you talk to them? And I've had some success in being able to put them together. I don't know, because those, we don't have a deal yet with the Chinese with specificity, but right. I think it's important for us to, they need to hear from people who are on the ground, who see the challenges that decisions that we make in government have on them.
Wonderful. Do you think tariffs are a more effective way to protect these companies than sustained federal investment in research and development?
You're starting to get a little bit out of my area of expertise, Governor.
Mm-hmm. All right, very well. Well, I will yield the balance of my time, and thank you for being here again.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Marshall.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chairwoman, and Mr. Secretary, again, welcome. And I just want to stop by saying what a great country we live in. I'm so proud that our carbon emissions today, a nice steady downward trend since 2003, and I think that's mainly due to conservation and innovation. And if I could take our time to lock in on agriculture and rural America for a second. As I look at the big picture, transportation creates about 29% of this country's carbon emissions, industry about a fourth, and agriculture about 9%. So we feed this entire country and only produce about 9% of carbon emissions, and we're still able to transport another fourth of our products out of the country with that in mind. In my adult lifetime, we're doubling the agriculture production. We're using less water, but still, over the last decade, agriculture's had a smaller carbon footprint. So I'm really proud of that. What is the DOE doing to help promote conservation, promote innovation? So even though we're improving, agriculture wants to keep improving. How can we keep working together? What can we do to put wind beneath your sail?
Yeah. Mr. Marshall, I think there's a couple of areas that I would mention, just that I've seen again in my travels through the national labs, and keep in mind one of my prior jobs in the state of Texas would be the agriculture commissioner for 8 years. So, and I grew up on a farm, and my mom still lives on that farm. So there's this real personal connection back to rural lifestyle, rural values, and certainly the great contribution that agriculture and those rural communities make to America. With that said, in the additive manufacturing side is one of the areas where I think we have some great potential to continue to be developing more efficient equipment, both from a weight and a strength standpoint, that these national labs, the work that's being done at Oak Ridge National Lab, their additive manufacturing facility there is pretty fascinating. I made mention of Secretary Carson having some manufactured housing, additive manufacturing housing shown on the mall here within the last 30 days. He also had a vehicle. It was a Cobra, a Shelby Cobra that was built by the national labs, and so the agricultural community can be served, I think, well in the additive manufacturing side with some of the work that we're doing. Also at the Sandia National Lab, and this is Sandia National Lab over in California at Lawrence Livermore. The work that they're doing on efficiency on diesel engine combustions and the emission side of it. Again, you don't think about the Department of Energy and agriculture. That's not the first thing that comes to mind. Idaho National Lab, I'll finish with this, the work that they're doing on biofuels and some of the real progress that they're making there. So there's three examples of a place where the Department of Energy is I think, making some positive impact on the agricultural/rural communities.
Great. Let's talk about rural America for a second and the challenges, the improvements of battery storage. Like Texas, Kansas has a large wind energy production. About 35% of our electricity is generated from wind. Was recently in Johnson City, Kansas, our largest solar farm. We were breaking ground on it recently. And what I learned is that despite originally intending to buy those solar panels from China, that already, as President Trump predicted, they've removed that supply chain of solar panels to other countries, and therefore able to pull this project off, so it's exciting. But one of the challenges is when we have battery storage for one or two people in a mile stretch, a dead-end road's a little bit different than battery storage for big cities. Can you speak a little bit what the DOE is doing for battery storage and how that technology is being improving? What do you see the future looks like?
Yeah. I mentioned a little earlier what was happening in Florida with what Governor DeSantis was laying out, along with Florida Power on their storage. A lot of that technology came from work that's been done at a national lab, PNNL, and some of the work that they're doing on battery storage. So there's new grid storage launch pad that's occurring at DOE. That's going to accelerate material development, testing, having some independent evaluation of battery materials, battery systems. I think I asked Paul to talk a little bit about some of the elements in these batteries that are not rare earth minerals that are going to be very effective for us, and that we don't have we don't have the concern about where those materials are going to be coming from that they're developed in the United States. So validating this material capability, accelerating new technologies, and obviously collaboration both with the DOE and the labs out there, and the private sector. And the states have a role to play in this as well. Of course. One of the things I always remind people is that when they think about Texas, they always think about, yeah, y'all are a big oil and gas producing state, which we are, but we also became the #1 wind energy producing state while I was the governor of the state, because we wanted to have a diverse portfolio. And so the wind energy side of what occurred in Texas, I remind my friends in Europe on a regular basis, Ms. Fletcher, when I go over there, that Texas produces more of its energy percentage-wise than what the European Union does. That's a good thing.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ms. Weston.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Secretary Perry, for joining us here today. Mr. Secretary, earlier this month, your department moved a political appointee into the position of Deputy Assistant Secretary for Energy Efficiency within DOE. Do you know the name of this individual?
Debbie Zorn. Yeah, actually, the White House.
I can just tell you, Mr. Secretary, it's Alex Fitzsimmons.
Yeah.
Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. Can you tell me anything about his qualifications for this job?
As a regular practice, I don't talk about personnel issues in the public.
Very good. Well, I'll just share with you some of what I've learned from in the public domain about Mr. Fitzsimmons. He graduated from George Washington University in 2012 with a degree in political science. And he spent the next 4 years in a variety of junior roles at fossil fuel energy advocacy groups, including the American Energy Alliance. Now, I was surprised to learn, but you may not be, that in 2015, while Mr. Fitzsimmons was there, the American Energy Alliance called for Congress to eliminate the Office of Energy Efficiency, the very office he now leads. Were you aware of that?
No, ma'am, but here's what I am aware of.
No, that was my question. Now, you know about the Office of Energy.
This is going to be good. You should let me go, but I'm not going to do it now.
Fair enough. Now, you do know about the Office of Energy Efficiency. It has hundreds of full-time staff. It supports thousands of national lab employees. It's the lead federal agency for energy efficiency policy, programs, and research, which include advanced manufacturing, building, federal energy management, and low-income weatherization, right? I mean, that's what it does. Now, by way of contrast with regard to qualifications, the previous Deputy Assistant Secretary for Energy Efficiency, Kathleen Hogan, served in that role for a decade. Prior to that, she served at EPA as a division director. She received a Presidential Rank Award, was inducted into the Energy Efficiency Hall of Fame for the U.S. Energy Association, and was a contributor to the Nobel Peace Prize awarded to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. She has a PhD from the Department of Geography and Environmental Engineering at Johns Hopkins University. And her predecessor served at DOE as a technology leader for nearly 20 years before rising to the rank of Deputy Assistant Secretary. Now, as I understand it, Mr. Fitzsimmons is the first ever political appointee to serve in that role, and he is by far the youngest. Can you tell me why you chose to fill the position with a political appointee instead of a career technologist?
I'm going to pass on talking about personnel issues.
Okay. Well, I understand that Mr. Fitzsimmons is serving in an acting role. Can you tell us when you expect to fill that position on a permanent basis?
I can't.
Okay. Well, when you do, I hope that you find somebody with the experience and gravitas to lead hundreds of the nation's best scientists and engineers. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some of the budget proposals from the administration. This year, the administration's budget request proposes massive cuts to renewable energy across the board, with cuts higher than 70% for both wind and solar offices. If these cuts were to take place, can you tell me approximately how many lab employees would lose their jobs?
I would have to go back and, I think trying to play the hypothesis game of if you do this, then what's this budget look like is kind of a waste of my time and your time, frankly.
Would you agree that cutting the budget by 70% will cause some of the lab employees to lose their jobs?
What I tell you is that I think, cutting you can make the statement that cutting the budget by 100% would cause some people to lose their job, but that's not the reality that's going to happen in this committee. And you look back historically at what this committee's done, and here's what's more important, is that I understand how to manage an agency. I had the opportunity to manage a fairly big entity for 14 years as the governor of the state of Texas. And I also respect the appropriations process. And the appropriators are going to decide the
Chair,
dollars that are
reclaiming my
spent.
time, if I may. Reclaiming my time. I understand what the Secretary is, Mr. Secretary, what you're saying about the budget and appropriations process, but what I would ask that you keep in mind is that even when these proposed cuts are rejected by Congress, which they surely will be, that you understand that these proposed cuts have severe impacts on lab employees and the morale within those labs that you have spoken so highly of. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fletcher.
Thank you, Chairwoman Johnson, for holding this hearing. Thank you, Secretary Perry, for testifying before our committee today. As a native Houstonian and a Texan, and now the representative for Texas's 7th Congressional District in Houston, where I represent the energy corridor, I appreciate all of the above energy approach that you've talked about this morning and that you embraced as the governor of our state. And these innovative policies have led Texas to being really the leader in renewable energy. People are indeed surprised when I tell them that Texas produces the most wind energy of any state in the union, more than 3 times the next leading state. And I give credit to your policies for that every time I talk about it, because I really think that it is important what we're doing in terms of diversifying our portfolio and talking about research. And so for that, there are a couple of budget priorities that I do want to talk about and get your perspective on this morning. The Department of Energy has worked on carbon dioxide removal technologies, and the intergovernmental panel that we've talked about this morning as well recommends carbon capture as being a critical piece in our path forward in combating climate change. So where DOE has worked on technologies like direct air capture and development through fossil energy, the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, ARPA-E, and the Office of Science. We've seen some of the major successes from that in the Petronova plant that you referenced earlier in your testimony. In addition, there is also in response to Congressman Byer's question, there's the Net Power plant just outside of Houston, which is working on natural gas technologies as well as coal. So there's a lot of that happening. But from the budget priorities, it's not clear whether the Department of Energy will continue to support this promising technology. Can you talk a little bit about what the Department of Energy plans to do going forward when it comes to carbon capture technology?
I can give it to you. The short version is we're going to continue to support it. It's going to continue to be a priority. There's a National Carbon Capture Center in Alabama. And that's going to be validating new technologies that are out there and some transformational technologies, taking it from the bench to lab scale. A key priority to all of this is going to be continuing to reduce the cost of the technology. So that you can get this broad deployment of these technologies. One of the things we try to do, and the reason, Congresswoman Fletcher, we put in, and I asked and was successful in getting into the Clean Energy Ministerial carbon capture, utilization, sequestration technologies in a global way, because, one of our roles, I think, is American technology is how the world, in a lot of cases, gets transformed. And if we can take this type of technology, if we can continue to improve it where it's a commercial scale, and get our friends in India and in China to take this technology and to implement it, then we really start having commercial scale impact on the environment. So one of the reasons this is, we continue to really push this is because of its applications globally. And so I can assure you that it's going to continue to stay a priority at the agency.
Well, and a follow-up to that question, because it was concerning to me that the fiscal year 2020 budget proposal, which I understand is just a proposal, but it had a 65% reduction in CCUS. And my understanding was that some of the rationale at least presented, was that this would be a place where industry could better commercialize the technology. My understanding at this point is that while certainly we use it for enhanced oil recovery, generally CCUS is not commercially viable. And so I guess the question I have for you in front of this committee is, what do you suggest that we do here to chart the path forward for CCUS and give you the tools that you need to continue that research at DOE?
Yeah, I tend to agree with your observation that it's going to still continue to require our DOE's engagement from the standpoint of expending some funds on innovation and technology. And this National Carbon Capture Center in Alabama is a great example of that. There's still work to be done. If I could correct the record just on one thing that I said earlier, and I made mention that that solar was producing more energy than hydro. It's actually wind energy. I should have known better, being from Texas. But I just, for the record.
Thank you, Secretary Perry. And with that, I see I've exceeded my time, so I will yield back, Madam Chair, or Mr. Chairman.
Madam Mister, the chair now recognizes Mr. Sherman for 5 minutes.
Mr. Secretary, 500,000 people live within just 10 miles of the Santa Susana Field Nuclear Laboratory. Your department signed the consent order for corrective action in 2007, and the administrative orders on consent in 2010 with the California Department of Toxic Substance Control. The latter required full cleanup of the site by 2017. So in 2010, your department agreed to full cleanup by 2017. But to date, no meaningful cleanup has occurred at all. So you're supposed to be completed by 2017. You haven't started by 2019. Will you come to the San Fernando Valley and explain to people when this site will be fully cleaned up?
Ms. Sherman, I would be more than happy to accompany you and try to explain, well, I'll do my best to explain that what happened 7 years before I got here and why there wasn't any progress made on that. But I don't know if I'll be successful in convincing
I look
anybody.
forward to joining you in the San Fernando Valley, and I thank your making that comment for the record. Countries that are friends live by the Non-Proliferation Treaty if they signed it. Iran and North Korea have gone toward a nuclear program without the additional protocol with the IAEA. And we have Saudi Arabia, which claims to be our friend, but at least when it comes to nuclear matters, seems to be acting like a rogue state. A South Korean firm, Korea Electric Power Corporation, is talking to the to Saudi Arabia about a large nuclear power construction project. That project, the South Korean nuclear project, is based on American technology. Can you state for the record the administration's position on whether this South Korean firm would need to see a 1-2-3 agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia to sell large nuclear reactors to Saudi Arabia?
Mr. Sherman, what I think we would be helpful here is that people understand the Part 810 and
I'm going to get to a Part 810 question, but the first question is South Korea free to build large nuclear plants in Saudi Arabia using American technology?
Here would be my answer: is it would be no, because they would require a Part 810 before they could go into because that is U.S. technology.
Well, I think they'd also need a 1-2-3 agreement, but I agree with you, it is U.S. technology.
Yes, sir.
can you commit to that the administration won't enter into a nuclear cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia unless Saudi Arabia signs the additional protocol? This has been our bargaining position on these since the 1990s.
Yes, sir. That has been our position in all of our conversations that we have had with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Good answer. The Atomic Energy Act, Section 303, requires that you keep Congress fully and currently informed on subject matters relating to atomic energy. You have issued at least 7 Part 810 authorizations to allow U.S. companies to discuss and submit documents to Saudi Arabia seeking their business. It took my office about 6 months to get a copy of these Part 810s. Can you promise to provide the 810 authorizations in the future if they relate to Saudi Arabia to both this committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee promptly?
Yes, sir. And let me the caveat on that, Ms. Sherman, would be unless the company deems them to be of proprietary information at that particular point in time. I don't know all the specific details, but every bit of information that is publicly disclosable, you can bet.
Well, I would hope that you keep in mind members of Congress are trusted
Yes, sir.
with the most secret information of our intelligence and defense agencies.
And
if I'm not going to reveal what I know from the CIA, I think Westinghouse can trust me.
Yep.
With that, I thank you for your answers. Good answers. Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair recognizes Mr. Perlmutter for 5 minutes.
Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony. Thanks for your stamina. We're getting to the end of the line here.
Yeehaw.
So, first thing, Mr. Secretary, 2033. Okay, I hold this bumper sticker up at a lot of hearings. The Undersecretary is familiar with this. This is when the orbits of Mars and Earth are the closest for decades, and we've been talking about getting our astronauts to Mars by 2033. And with your interest and your work with NASA on potentially nuclear propulsion as part of the ability to get our astronauts there, I just want to enroll you in getting our astronauts to Mars by 2033, and I want you to work with Mr. Bridenstine on that. You don't have to answer it. I just want to enroll all of you in this measure.
Yeah,
okay?
I want to answer it, though.
All right.
Buzz Aldrin will wear me out if we don't get ourselves to Mars as soon as we can.
All right, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. All right, number 2, Dr. Foster, who was up here talking about argon and Fermi and Illinois and all that stuff, he is one of the most biased co-chairs in favor of his state that any of us could ever have. And as you know, and I appreciate the visits that you all have made out to the National Renewable Energy Lab, which is in my district, and obviously very proud of that. And I think some of the words you've used, I think we've got to really take heart. And I'm going to lay into you guys a little bit, because you used words like brilliant, capable, outstanding staff, your scientists, your technicians, your engineers, second to none in the world, okay? And you as the chief executive, you as the lieutenant, the CFO here, you've got a staff that's fantastic. And if you were back as governor of Texas and you say to that staff, you know what, I'm going to cut your budget by 85%. That's what you guys mean to me. I mean, when you say that, it hurts. And so Ms. Lofgren and you had an interesting conversation. You said, I'm going to look to Congress to help me on this. But I'm going to say to you, Mr. Secretary, we look to you. We depend on you to defend your department. So I'm going to just ask you, what are the dynamics that lead to something like an 85% cut to the energy efficiency and renewable energy portfolio?
Yeah. I'll give it back to you like I did, or I think I did.
Remember, last year, you and the Undersecretary and I talked about these budget cuts, which last year were pretty draconian. I said, look, administration to administration, you can kind of push a priority, but you don't gut the rest of it. And you said, no, we don't want to do that. But again, it happened.
But I don't think, that's not the budget. And we have a budget that's already been approved. And that's not what the budget is. I know what the OMB said, but I mean, again, I go back.
I guess my dynamics are between you and OMB, how does it really work? Because they come in with these budgets. They say this is what it's going to be, and you have to say, okay, but we're going to work with Congress?
Pretty much.
Okay.
I ain't going to lie to you.
All right.
Listen, I
No,
don't write,
no,
I
that's
don't
why
write
I'm
that
asking
budget.
you.
And when I was the governor of the state of Texas, I had a budget, and it would go over to the legislature, and I knew what it would turn out to be. And that was a doorstop.
All right.
And
So-
that's
so
how
let me-
OMB's
let me
budget,
ask
I
you
think,
this.
does
So let's-
Congress look
No, I
like.
appreciate this conversation. So as the head of the department, when OMB comes back with these numbers that really aren't realistic, that are going to change dramatically in Congress, what do you say to the staff? Doesn't matter? If we're going to go to Congress and we'll see what they do?
Pretty much.
All right. All right. Okay, so that's enough
Listen,
of that.
this is their prerogative. I understand how the process works. I don't get spun up and
But I don't want your staff to get spun up. That's the point.
I don't
And
think
that's
they
where,
do.
All
And
right.
I don't think the national lab folks, they know where I stand on this. They have heard me not only in word but in deed.
And we've seen
supporting
that.
them.
We've seen that, and I appreciate that because you have defended and stood up for the National Renewable Energy Lab and these other labs,
And we'll
I
continue
appreciate
to.
that. All right, last thing. That laboratory, NREL, has something similar to somebody else mentioned, what we call the co-laboratory, which is the lab, Colorado University, Colorado State, the School of Mines. Conoco used to be part of that group. I think they still may be, as a way to provide the best minds towards, advancing science and advancing the commercial use of some of these new technologies. So I just wanted to put that out there, that we've been doing that for a while.
And that's interesting. It's some of these types of innovative solutions, options is how I look at managing DOE. Listen, OMB has their job, they do their job, I get that. But it's coming up with some of these solutions using the private sector, using some university resources and what have you, to find the way to manage these, to get us to the point where we can have solutions.
All right, thank you, gentlemen, and I yield back my time.
Thank you. The chair will now recognize himself for 5 minutes. Thank you so much for coming, Secretary Perry. Really appreciate it. Earlier this week, we received reports that the Department of Agriculture was actively working to bury peer-reviewed scientific reports on the impacts of climate change in the agricultural sector. And look, there's a significant problem. This administration has some discomfort around objective truth. But as it comes to climate change, this is a real concern, because if we are essentially going to reject the scientific method and our processes, we are going to put not just the American people, but our entire species at risk. So my question to you, Mr. Secretary, which is a real simple one, I don't think you'll need your notes for this. Are you personally aware of any steps that your department is taking to suppress reports that discuss climate change or its effects?
No, as a matter of fact, we just announced today
I've got a number of questions, so I'm delighted to hear that. That's terrific. Can I have your commitment that if you become aware of any of those efforts, you will exert your leadership role to make sure it doesn't happen?
Sure.
Terrific. I'm delighted to hear that. I'm delighted to hear in your opening testimony that you accept that man-made climate change is real and something we have to deal with. I like to point out to people that in the 100,000 years or so that our species has existed, 50% of all the CO2 we have ever emitted was since 1980. That was the year that Nolan Ryan signed with the Houston Astros. That's within our collective memory, and the scale of that change is meaningful. As we warm the climate, the average temperature goes up by a few degrees, but the number of extreme events increases dramatically. You mentioned that in a number of your testimony as well. I know you personally are aware of this in Houston. I think these are easy. Presumably you would agree that there's been a significant increase in the number of extreme weather events?
Yeah.
And would you agree that those are caused by global warming?
I'm not sure I can.
Would you agree that weather is a bell curve, and as you move the average in the bell curve, you increase the tails by a much greater percent than the middle?
I'm not going to, those are your words, not mine. And listen, I think sitting here trying to.
Well, I'm asking you to opine on basic statistics. If you're not comfortable with basic statistics, I'll move on. But I will stipulate that
I'm comfortable with the Department of Energy is doing some really fascinating work on predictive modeling, and I hope you would be supportive of that, rather than sitting here trying to go back and forth about do you believe this, do you believe that. Is look at what we're doing.
Well, Secretary,
and what we're doing is making some real progress on giving predictive, real science-based evidence to this committee and to the citizens of this country.
Secretary Perry, if I may,
important.
I agree. I think the Department of Energy is awesome. And I'm going to echo Mr. Perlmutter. You run a $12 billion agency that does fantastic work. The weatherization budget is zeroed out. What I need as a citizen, and I think what we need as a Congress, is for you to exercise leadership to defend those budgets and priorities, even when the administration doesn't, because it is clear that OMB and the President are not supporting that. I want to shift to something that I think we may have a whole lot of agreement on. I'm delighted to hear you describe energy storage as the holy grail of energy. We've got this fantastic improvement in your state and elsewhere of resources that need storage to balance out load. It's why one of the first major bills I introduced when I got here was the Bipartisan Promoting Grid Storage Act, which would create cross-cutting R&D programs at DOE and technical assistance and demonstration programs to help the public and private sector de-risk and deploy those new storage technologies. Your budget, to its credit, increases the energy storage R&D supported by the Office of Electricity by 5%. That's about $2.5 million. It reduces spending in the Renewable Energies Vehicle Technologies Program by 79%, or $270 million. So that is a net drop of, let's round it off, $270 million in funding for energy storage that I think from your testimony and sort of where I come from, we agree. Can you help me understand and this committee understand why, if energy storage is indeed the holy grail of technology, we have a budget that drastically defunds our commitment to deploy the energy storage that we need to keep our grid resilient in the mix of changing resources we have?
In a broad sense, what I would tell you is that the cross-cutting technologies, I mean, just because we don't fund at the same level as we have historically, or that you've seen in previous line items, doesn't mean that there's not ongoing technology moving something forward. For instance, I would suggest to you that in some of the electric vehicle side of things, we've spent the dollars to get us to the point where we need to be with those, and we don't need to be, spending more dollars going forward in that we've already, moved to a place where we're comfortable.
But I'm talking about in aggregate total spending. Your budget would suggest that you think that the technologies are all mature and we don't need R&D anymore, given a 79% cut.
Not necessarily. What I'm saying is that I think that we have the ability to manage those dollars in a way where the priorities are. Are the priorities on the electric vehicle a place they were 4 years ago? No, because we've matured.
Okay. Well, given the comments just made to Mr. Perlmutter that it sounded like you felt like the OMB budget was just something, but we're going to fix that. We agree that energy storage is the holy grail. I think we agree that the budget doesn't meet that goal. What would you like to see Congress do to develop a budget that's actually going to deploy energy storage at the scale we need?
I think the budget that we've got is appropriate to get us to the place that we need to be.
Across the board?
Yeah, across the board. The budget that's already been approved.
The OMB budget?
No, the budget that 19.
Okay. I yield back my time. Ms. Hill is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Perry, my colleague, Mr. Sherman, a few minutes ago engaged with you about the Santa Susana Field Lab. We are neighbors, and so I want to second what he stated, given that many of my constituents are impacted by this site as well, which is just outside of my district. And although operations at the site ceased in 2006, it remains extremely toxic with both chemical and radioactive contamination. I'm deeply disappointed, along with my constituents, with the lack of action and transparency the DOE has shown with respect to cleanup activities at this site over the last decade. As Mr. Sherman discussed, the DOE and NASA signed an administrative order of consent ordering that DOE and NASA take responsibility for their pollutants and contaminants at the Santa Susana Field Lab and do a full cleanup, which was supposed to be completed in 2017 and clearly has not been. And in fact, nearly nothing of progress has happened. So can you speak more specifically about your plans of action for the complete cleanup of this site and how long it will take?
Let me give you the, for the record here, the department, as you said, signed a administrative order of consent with California to clean up the background cleanup at the site. And the preferred alternative in the FEIS is not in the AOC cleanup for the following reasons. There are various factors that are included in making a recommendation for preferred alternative. These include considering the final land use of the site as open space and the ecological and cultural impacts of any cleanup option. Additionally, studies performed after signing the AOC identified less contamination than previously projected. When considering the factors with potential effects at the site, the preferred alternative would be the best option for the site to be cleaned in a way that ensures it will be protective of human health and the environment while avoiding unnecessary damage to the cultural and ecological resources present at the site. The final decision will be fully protective of human health and the environment.
I understand that. So what's the progress in terms of the preferred alternative? Is there a negotiation that needs to happen? What are we looking at in terms of something being able to, I mean, no cleanup really has started, right? So even a preferred alternative, I would like to see some action towards, and I'm wondering if you can speak to that.
May I get Undersecretary DeBard
Yeah,
to share with
thank
you?
The environmental impact statement was completed by us, and sorry, we can't comment on what happened in a previous leadership team, but we completed that. We submitted that to the state, and we're working with the state on the actual specifics of what would make sense given that environmental impact statement. We look forward to working with the state of California on that.
Thank you. So I know that you mentioned to Mr. Sherman, or my colleague, that you might visit our region and speak about this with our constituents, and I look forward to discussing those plans further. I know that the other piece that has been somewhat confusing to our region is the level of resources that have been allocated to cleanup, and I do recognize that this happened before your administration, but can you explain how the department decides to distribute the funds between nuclear cleanup sites?
Well, I think we go through a process of I mean, when you look at the history of this country, when you look at Hanford, for instance, when you look at the Manhattan Project and all of the cleanup, that we have a massive amount of work to be done in the future. So, you know, we prioritize it as best we can, and I think do a relatively passable job of my bet is you think they probably need to spend a little bit more money in the San Fernando Valley would be my bet.
I'm guessing everybody wants more money to be spent on
I'm pretty
their
sure
cleanup.
that the senators from Washington State have the same observation that there's not enough money spent in the Hanford site to suit them.
I do think that it would be worth us taking a better look at just how these decisions are made, maybe
I
some
don't
metrics
disagree with
and how we can just better understand that and explain it back to our constituents as well. But I do commend the department for restarting the low-dose radiation program, and if we want fewer resources to be spent on cleanup, we should change our radiation limits and regulation. Really quick, I know I don't have a lot of time left, but I want to turn to Freedom Gas and Renewables. And Secretary Perry, last month you released an announcement that the Department of Energy would be expanding Freeport LNG facility in Texas to spread Freedom Gas to other countries. And while I applaud the desire to increase the economic competitiveness of the U.S. through the export of energy technologies to other countries, I'm concerned that the majority of the time is spent advocating for coal and natural gas as opposed to renewable sources. So I'm wondering if you can just talk about how those other sources of energy, whether it's solar, wind, hydropower, and geothermal, are going to be included in these plans in terms of export.
Again, I remind people of my history with wind. There is not a elected official in the country, not a governor, not a president, no one who has a record that is any more productive when it comes to a renewable, in this case wind, than I had as the governor of the state of Texas. So, and we continue to promote them and talk about them. We do an all of the above impact, but let me get with specificity to LNG and why you may, or it may appear to a lot of folks that you spend an inordinate amount of time promoting liquefied natural gas. And I don't shy away from that. I do. I think it is a clean burning fuel that every molecule of LNG that we can get into the market, displacing older, inefficient coal-burning plants in Europe, for instance, is a win for the climate. And I'm going to continue doing that because I think the idea that not only is it in our best interest from a geopolitical standpoint, it's also in the climate's best interest, and I think it's in the world's best interest. So we promote a all-of-the-above approach. We, by and large, don't try to pick winners from losers. We try to explain to people why the technology may be better for them to go one way or the other. But by and large, we stick with the all-of-the-above approach, and if it can come from the United States and be United States friendly, technology-wise or resource-wise, then I think that's good for us.
Well, I know I'm out of time, and I want to thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Mr. Lipinski for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here, for your testimony. You talked about high-performance computing, the importance of it. You were at Argonne National Lab a couple months ago for a announcement on the Aurora computer, so thank you for coming out there. Just last week in the House Energy and Water Appropriation Bill, I introduced an amendment. We passed the amendment to provide additional funding for the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility, support personnel, and help us to hopefully to speed the process of this exascale computer. So can you elaborate on the potential of exascale computing and the ramifications if we fall behind it as we are racing China on this?
Yeah. I think the simplest way that I tell people about what's going on with exascale and then quantum computing is this. Who gets to quantum first wins. And I know that may be so simplistic, but it's really true. And the work that we're doing getting us to exascale, obviously that Aurora computer at Argonne is one of the first steps. I think the next one is out at Lawrence Berkeley, and getting us to exascale, and that's doing, as I said earlier, a billion transactions per second. Then the next step is quantum, and at that particular point in time, and for the U.S. to get to that first, it's going to impact everything across the board, because the artificial intelligence, the machine learning that goes along with them, and being able to manage that much data is kind of the name of the game. So.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate your support, and we need to continue to support it and provide the funding that's necessary to move this forward. I want to move on to artificial intelligence efforts. The DOE has many efforts going on, as well as other federal agencies also do. I know that the administration has taken steps to improve coordination of AI, but I think the coordination efforts could be improved. So earlier this year, I introduced the Growing Artificial Intelligence Through Research Act, which in part ensures that they're a central coordinating entity. So I just wanted to ask, can you describe how AI efforts are coordinated across DOE, as well as coordinated with other federal agencies, and how might your AI efforts benefit from additional coordination?
Mr. Lipinski, your question is pretty timely. I mentioned this a little earlier, but tomorrow I'm going to, I'm doing a little tour of DARPA, of which we're talking about the coordination between DOE and, in this case, DOD and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency over there. And so they're very focused on AI. Now, in a lot of cases, as Undersecretary DeBar said, they have a different mission than DOE does, but we complement each other. And what we want to do is make sure that we're not duplicating, that we are, in fact, complementing, that there's some synergy that comes out of the dollars that we're expending dealing with artificial intelligence and how we combine those. Nuclear security is part of this. The electric grid security is part of this. All of these areas are going to cybersecurity, modeling for Ms. Fletcher, the thing that I mentioned with Mr. Carson earlier about the predictive modeling that DOE is going into, so we can better predict what's going to happen with these severe storms. These computers, this artificial intelligence that's going to be managed with these computers, with this predictive modeling. These are examples of where we can stand up in front of our constituents and say, listen, here's where your tax dollars are being spent. And here's some good return on that investment that you're having. Self-driving cars, I mean, this list goes on and on.
Thank you. I just want to get in one.
Yeah.
Mr. Lipinski, I think actually Argonne is really at the cutting edge of your exact topic. Let me just quickly comment to it. Historically, AI has primarily people have been focused on it as image capture and data pattern recognition. That's what most people talk about when they talk about AI. Argonne is much farther down the road on this, and this deals with your exact point in which it deals with coordination. Using AI to learn first principles at physics, at chemistry, at biology, and at materials, for AI to actually do research based on first principles science is actually where AI is going. And so I think your bill is very important. And about coordination, what they're doing at Argonne, I think, is very much at the cutting edge, because this isn't just about the advanced computing and Rick Stevens at Argonne. They just showed up here and just laid out the head of materials and chemistry from Argonne, the head of the light source for imaging, and the head of computing. And they're developing a holistic cycle of research based on first principles of using AI to drive first principles of physics and of materials, and then using the imaging machine at Argonne as all one organized entity to do research. This is actually where research is going.
I just want to, just for the record, I'm going to ask you, because my time's up, if you can give more information about the funding opportunity announcement for fiscal year 20 about the 2 or more multidisciplinary quantum research centers. I wanted to get find out more about that. It's something I'm very interested in. It's something also that Argonne is very interested in. So
yes, sir. We'll get it, and we'll get it in the record. And let me just finish by saying, October, this coming October, there will be an X-Lab event at Argonne, and it is focused on artificial intelligence. Hope you'll be there.
Thank you.
Yes,
Yield
sir.
back.
Thanks. Before we bring the hearing to a close, I want to thank Secretary Perry for coming to testify before the committee today. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from members and for any additional questions the committee may ask of the witness. The witness is excused, and the hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you, Madam Chair.